right. Good morning, everybody. We're good on the live stream? Great. Well, to the folks joining us via the live stream, welcome. Thank you. I'm Steve Ritzky. I'm in the Employment and Training Administration. I'm a division chief in the Office of Workforce Investment. And it's really a thrill to see all these friendly faces in the Great Hall here in Washington at the Francis Perkins Building. Welcome to the Department of Labor. Thank you for being here at the Navigating the Skills Frontier Summit. I recognize we kind of had an aggressive timeline for putting this event together, but here we all are. I'm so thrilled that you were able to travel here, whether it was across town, across the whole country. I know we have folks coming from at least as far as Washington State and maybe farther. And we have so much expertise in this room. We were able to put an agenda together with so many smart folks, and I know we have so many other smart folks in the audience, and I really appreciate you all being here. I want to give a quick couple of thank yous before we get into it. One, just an extra thank you to the folks who are on our agenda speaking. I know that, to make it here on short notice is one thing, and then for us to put you up in front of the room with these very legit looking cameras back there on such a short timeline, but that's the caliber of folks we got on this agenda. I think speaks to their ability to show up and really share some great work that they're doing and some great knowledge. So appreciate all of you agreeing to speak. I also want to give a shout out to the folks who are here from the LER conference. There's another event across town focused on learning and employment records. And kind of a couple weeks into planning this event, we realized we were overlapping. But I talked to the folks planning the event at AEM, and we realized, hey, there's some good connectivity between this event and their event. So we actually had folks from that event come here today and sort of join forces and merge in. Can I get a quick show of hands? Who's here for both events? Quite a few folks. Well, thank you all for letting us merge, and thanks for coming here. I hope that the context and the content at this event is going to be instructive and helpful for the rest of your event. So appreciate the flexibility. I also want to give a thank you to ETA staff who were helping to plan this event. Too many to name individually, but I'm going to give a special shout out to Lauren Fairley, who was very much at the center of all the logistics and everything that goes into an event of this size. So Lauren, wherever you are, thank you very much. To our Department of Education colleagues who helped to shape the agenda and have some speaking roles as well. And then to our contract team supporting the event at Jafrita Associates, Sunny, Aaron, Tori, Annette in particular, Pam Frugally, lending her expertise, and last but not least, Cynthia Forland, who really helped me to shape the agenda and prep the speakers and everything. So thank you. Wherever she is, she's wearing something that really blends in. It's bright orange. And to the DOL facilities folks and AV folks, thank you very much. So let me talk a little bit about what are we doing here. We called this the Navigating the Skills Frontier Summit. I know there's a lot of data geeks and taxonomy type folks in the room, so let me just start off by saying we know that we're using the word skills as a shorthand. We really mean skills and knowledge and competencies and abilities and all of that stuff, but navigating the knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies, and other stuff summit didn't quite roll off the tongue the same way. So we shortened it a bit. But you all know this, but I'm gonna kind of simplify just to frame and kind of level set for this event. For decades now, across education, training, employment pipelines, we've really pushed to make these systems be informed by and responsive to employer demand, right? It just makes sense. If you're gonna train somebody, you want them to have skills that are relevant in the labor market. And to state the obvious, Employers need workers to execute particular duties in their jobs. We might call those tasks or work activities. They use tools and technologies, programming languages, and so on. And to carry out those duties effectively and productively, workers need particular knowledge, skills, abilities, competencies. And to get a great match where the worker has the skills they need to succeed in a specific job, and an employer hires a worker with those skills, and for that worker and that employer to find each other relatively efficiently, they both need really good information to help them, right? The job seeker needs to understand and be able to describe the skills that they have. Maybe that's on their resume or some other kind of, learning and employment record. The employer needs to understand and be able to signal the skills that they need. And as a prerequisite to all of this, educational institutions, training providers, they need to be able to understand a whole lot of employers' collective skill requirements. They need to be able to translate those requirements into academic requirements, training objectives, curriculum, and they need to be able to communicate and help their students communicate the skills that their programs teach, right? Nobody fell out of their chair. I know, this is stuff we all know, right? And it sounds simple when you boil it down like that, but when you kind of multiply it across millions of employers, workers, job seekers, and students, thousands of education and training organizations, dozens of sectors, and hundreds of industries, it gets really complicated. And in this moment we're in right now, AI is reshaping the workforce faster than our systems are set up to handle. The information gaps and the noise to signal ratios are growing, and it's really increasingly hard for workers and employers, the right workers and the right employers, to find each other. At the same time, all this technology, generative AI, semantic architecture, open interoperable data structures, present enormous opportunities for us to close those information gaps, to improve the signal to noise, and give students, workers, job seekers, educators, employers much better information to help them make better decisions about the training they pursue, the jobs they apply for, and the people to hire. There's an urgent need for us to seize that opportunity, to collaborate across sectors, to identify the most pressing problems and barriers, and to devise solutions that provide people with more timely, local, and actionable information. So this is why we've convened all of you. We've got folks representing public workforce development professionals at the state and local level, policymakers, federal partners, education and training providers, employers, cutting-edge researchers, foundations, and other nonprofit folks. And we know we're not starting this event with a blank sheet of paper. The speakers on this agenda are here because not just because they're big thinkers, but because they're designers and problem solvers. From ETA's perspective, we want to harness and leverage this collective creativity that we have in this room to help inform work that we've already started. Two of those efforts are outlined in a public request for information, or an RFI, that we put on the table yesterday for publication today in the Federal Register. It's called Modernizing Federal Workforce Information Tools. And in that document, we're requesting public input to inform our work to improve both online career tools that US DOL provides to the public, as well as the Occupational Information Network program, or ONET. We really envision a modernized ONET with greater timeliness, granularity, interoperability, as a particularly critical data infrastructure to help enable common language about skills across education, workforce, and employment domains. And I want to give a nod to our partners at the ONET Center in the North Carolina Department of Commerce for the work that they've already done to start to lay the groundwork for this modernization effort. Through both today's session and that more formal input that we get through the RFI process, we really hope to inform these projects that are already underway here, as well as other work that we'll do in this space. And more generally, we hope that by bringing you all together here today and tomorrow, we can spark some great dialogue, give you some new connections and opportunities to collaborate, and really come away with a better sense of the problems that we're trying to solve and how they play out among different stakeholders, and the solutions that are most actionable and most impactful for us to take at the federal level, at the state level, and in other arenas. So that's why we're here. Before we move on to the rest of the agenda, I do want to pause for a second and just point out some basic logistics. Restrooms are through the curtains on either side there, and then right and left down the hallways off to the side. This isn't going to happen, so I'll knock on wood, but if there's a fire drill or an emergency or something, there are exits this way to Constitution Avenue, and then the entrance that you came in that direction, the visitor's entrance. When we're up in breakout rooms, we're going to be on the 3rd and the 5th floors, and we'll have folks guiding you and signs to help you find those areas. This building is easy to get lost in, even if you've worked here for 20 years. We're going to take a break this morning at 10:45 until 11:15. Lunch is 12:30 to 1:30. If you've been to a federal event before and it wasn't a state dinner, then you know that paying for catering is not our specialty. But we have a cafeteria on the 6th floor. I don't want to overpromise, but I've been told by the cafeteria that today is Tostada Tuesday, and tomorrow is Wings Wednesday. So that's kind of why we needed to have it these 2 days specifically. Now, I would like to introduce our chief economist at the U.S. Department of Labor, Julia Pollack, to give you some additional opening remarks before we start our opening plenaries. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Department of Labor's 2026 Summit on Navigating the Skills Frontier. I want to begin by thanking all of you for being here, our partners in academia, state workforce agencies, employers, labor organizations, tech companies, credentialing organizations, and the many current and former members of the ONET team, the ONET community, who've devoted years to understanding work. I also want to recognize the ETA team, especially Kim Vitelli and Stephen Ritsky, whose leadership drove this summit. I'm impressed every day by their expertise and dedication and creativity. I also want to thank Acting Secretary Keith Sonderling and ETA Assistant Secretary Henry Mack for their unwavering support of this work. They bring deep expertise, a relentless focus on results, and a deep commitment to using better workforce information to expand opportunity for American workers and strengthening our economy. On a podcast last week, Alex Imus, director of AGI Economics at Google DeepMind, called for a Manhattan Project on data. If such a project were launched on labor market data and skills data, the best team money could buy is right here. And I mean that. And like the original Manhattan Project, success would require bringing together people with different kinds of expertise: economists, statisticians, technologists, employers, educators, practitioners, policymakers, to solve a problem that is larger than one discipline alone can solve. Now, briefly, before I talk about our Manhattan Project and where ONET should go, let us briefly reflect on what an extraordinary achievement ONET already is. Nearly 30 years ago, a group of researchers, statisticians, industrial organization psychologists set out to answer an ambitious question. Could we build a common language for work? Not a list of job titles, not a collection of anecdotes, not a catalog of tasks, but a common language that could systematically describe the knowledge, skills, abilities, work activities, occupational requirements that define work across the entire economy. That was a bold vision. The federal government had long relied on the Dictionary of Occupational Titles from the 30s, a remarkable resource for its era, but one built for a different, more static economy. The labor market was becoming increasingly dynamic, increasingly high-tech, increasingly difficult to describe through static task inventories. The architects of ONET envisioned a system that would not simply describe occupations, it wouldn't just be sort of a reference library of occupations, but something that would be part of the labor market infrastructure of the country, that would connect workers to opportunities, that would help employers identify talent, that would help researchers understand labor markets, that would help educators align training to workforce needs, that would help policymakers navigate economic change. You know, if you read some of those founding documents, they sound pioneering for today. In many ways, the architects, the lifelong stewards, the champions of ONET were decades ahead of their time. And I'm speaking of Norman Peterson, Michael Mumford, Walter Borman, Richard Jeanneret, Edwin Fleischman, James Rounds, Phil Lewis, David Rifkin, Larry Mead, John Holland, Renee Dawes, Harold Goldstein, Pam Frugally, Jim Woods. Some of you might be here. If you are, stand up, and we'll give you a round of applause. It's worth acknowledging that ONET was not built because the federal statistical system naturally gravitates towards disruption and risk-taking. Quite the opposite. Our statistical agencies are notoriously cautious. They value continuity, they value comparability, they value methodological rigor. Those are all virtues, but they can also create a kind of weighty, deadening inertia that's very difficult. When you come here and you know you have just a couple of years to make a difference, it's very difficult to get through. So ONET exists because a group of pioneers within the Department of Labor and its partners were willing to challenge assumptions, experiment with new approaches, and imagine a fundamentally different way of organizing labor market information, and they deserve enormous credit for that daring and disruptive endeavor. Frankly, ONET gives us as a department significant bragging rights. Many federal classification systems evolve very slowly. The SOC system, for example, is revised once a decade. And when I once had the audacity to suggest that we might want to shorten that cadence, I felt like Spinoza or something. I thought I was going to be excommunicated for heresy. I was told, we put out a notice 4 years before the next revision, and then it takes us 4 years to go through the 40,000 comments that come in, people manually suggesting new occupations. And when I suggested that process didn't sound like a 21st century process, I felt like I'd overstepped lines and like I should shut up. ONET never accepted that cadence. It was built for continuous improvement. Occupations are updated frequently. Content evolves continuously. New technologies, new skills, new occupational specialties, emerging occupations can be incorporated without waiting 10 years for the next revision cycle. We have in ONET acknowledged that some occupations are just too broad and that actually there are specialties that are distinct within them. And we've added on 2 decimal places. And we haven't done it everywhere across the whole economy, but we've done it in certain sectors. So ONET's innovations also extend beyond its content model. Across the federal statistical system, survey response rates have been declining for years. Collection costs have been rising. Every statistical agency is grappling with the challenge of producing high-quality information in a world where traditional survey methods are becoming more difficult and more expensive. ONET faces those challenges too, but one thing that has impressed me repeatedly is how far ahead of the curve the ONET community is in thinking about alternative data sources. Long before other programs were seriously discussing these issues, ONET researchers and contractors were exploring job postings, worker profiles, machine learning techniques, natural language processing, and other emerging sources of labor market information. They have been asking difficult questions that many programs are only beginning to confront or refusing to confront. How do we balance rigor and timeliness? How do we maintain transparency while embracing innovation? Where do we truly need surveys? Where can alternative data complement surveys? Where can it actually replace them? In some government agencies, when you ask a question like that, you feel like you're going to be excommunicated, but not here, not in this group. Not only does ONET have noble beginnings, the right goals, the right operating philosophy for success, it has tremendous momentum right now. If you read research papers on current workforce issues, on AI's labor market impact, on all the key issues of our time, you hear ONET again and again and again. If you listen to podcasts on these issues, it's a word that comes up all the time. A remarkable share of recent AI impact research relies on ONET. Researchers studying automation, AI exposure, occupational change are all relying on it as a key resource that hasn't been surpassed. It is a crucial resource for understanding technological change, and its importance will only grow. Now, our admiration generally should never become complacency. ONET also faces criticism, and the most serious criticisms come from the very people who use it most and who love it most. The people gathered in this room are here because we value ONET, but we're also here because we believe it can be better. Let's consider the original goal of creating a common language for work. That goal remains very compelling. Yet when you look across the private sector today, many large employers maintain their own job architectures, their own competency models, their own skill taxonomies. And if the world feels they need to invest in parallel systems, when ideally a taxonomy should be a lingua franca connecting schools and employers and job seekers, well, we should ask why. What would make ONET more useful as a genuinely shared, used language? What would make it easier to adopt? What would make it easier to integrate? Consider ONET's goal of helping us understand work. In the AI era, understanding work increasingly requires understanding not only what workers do, but how technology is changing what they do. Many of the AI exposure measures that appear in economic research today are derived from ONET, and they're useful, but they're also notional. Right? They tell us where AI might matter. They don't tell us where AI is actually being used. They don't tell us how intensively it's being used. They don't tell us how jobs are changing because of it. They don't tell us which tasks are being redesigned or newly created. The next frontier is not simply measuring exposure to AI, it's measuring adoption, utilization, transformation. Another challenge concerns geography. ONET provides national occupational information. That's one of its great strengths. But many users of ONET will tell you what they really wish for is a local ONET, right? They need to answer questions like, can this region supply the workers needed for a new manufacturing facility? Where should we put the facility that will assure American drone dominance? What skills are available in the 30-mile radius around this place? Right? What occupations provide the best transition pathways into this growing industry? Here. Someone in this room told me, when you get dressed in the morning, you don't check the average national temperature. That would be really unhelpful. You need to figure out what's going on right here, right now. So, while national averages are incredibly valuable, we clearly need something better. Decision makers need local intelligence layered on top of national frameworks. So we should think carefully about how ONET can support that future. Consider another goal, the goal to support skills-based hiring. I think it's fair to say that most people in this room imagine a labor market where employers focus more on what workers can do and less on broad proxies and unnecessary credentials. Who here agrees that job candidates should be evaluated based on skills, competencies, personalities, interests, rather than just the degree on their diploma? ONET provides one of the richest skill frameworks in the world, and yet millions of hiring decisions every day continue to rely on imperfect proxies rather than direct measures of the relevant skills, knowledge, and abilities and competencies for the particular job. If we truly believe in skills-based hiring, then we should ask ourselves a difficult question. Why has progress been slower than so many of us hoped? Is it awareness? Is it usability? Is it lack of sufficient granularity or variation? Is it validation? Is it implementation? Is it fear of legal liability? Is it fear of disparate impact liability? Right, some of the barriers to adoption may be outside of ONET. They may be external, but even those could potentially be solved or helped, mitigated, by some changes to ONET. Those are the kinds of questions this summit is intended to explore. While we absolutely want the private sector, academia, nonprofits, and entrepreneurs to continue building applications on top of ONET, right? We don't want to get into retail application development. We build the data, you go build the apps. I think that shouldn't cause us to just sit on our laurels and say, we've done our job, go do yours, right? We shouldn't be satisfied if important potential stakeholders have never heard of ONET or find it difficult to navigate or struggle to apply it. We shouldn't be satisfied if transformative opportunities remain unrealized. We can do better, and we must do better. The good news is that we are beginning this conversation from a position of enormous strength. We have a world-class asset. We have decades of accumulated expertise. We have the most vibrant research community in this room, and we have tremendous political leadership at this moment backing us up. In fact, the work we're discussing here directly supports two of the administration's highest priorities. The President's AI Action Plan directs us to better understand how AI is being adopted across the economy, how it's changing work, how we can ensure that American workers are prepared to thrive alongside new technologies. And America's talent strategy challenges us to expand skills-based hiring, to reduce unnecessary barriers to opportunity, and to build a labor market that does a better job of recognizing talent wherever it's found. Those goals require better information, better measurement, better tools. The title of the summit is Navigating the Skills Frontier. A frontier is not a destination, it's a place of exploration. It's a place where old assumptions are tested, where new possibilities emerge. It's a place where people with different perspectives come together to build something larger than each could build alone. That is what I hope we accomplish over the next 2 days. Let's debate ideas openly and freely. Let's imagine what ONET could become with limitless budget, limitless expertise. Let's make the case for the resources we need, and then let's do what Americans did 250 years ago on a new frontier. Roll up our sleeves and build it anyway, real-world constraints and all. Thank you for being here, and I greatly look forward to the next 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Julia, for those remarks. That was a great frame for this event. Without further ado, I'd like to bring up the opening plenary. This session is going to focus on kind of a cross-cutting view of the issues that we're talking about from the perspective of states, from the perspective of academia and research, philanthropy, business. Thank you all for speaking, and I'll turn it over to you, Kim, as the moderator.
Good morning, everyone. I had to count chairs and make sure I wasn't supposed to be standing up there. It looks like we're all set. Julia and Steve did such a good job of sort of setting us up for today that I'm not going to spend too much time setting up this particular plenary, but I want to share that the whole point of this summit and this conversation today is that we're hearing from a lot of different perspectives, and we have a lot of breakout rooms later in the day where we're sort of diving deep on like a particular stakeholder group. And what we're starting with, though, is sort of the whole gamut. So we're going to get to set ourselves up and get like a taste for everything else that we're going to talk about today. I'm joined by just a robust panel. Let me introduce them briefly before I jump into questions. Dana Brandt, the Vice President of State Data System Advancement at Strata Education Foundation. Scott Sanders, President and CEO of the National Association of State Workforce Agencies. I have there. Dr. Jeff Stroll, Research Professor and Director, Georgetown University Center of Education and the Workforce. And Jennifer Zeller, the Director of Strategic Solutions at Georgia Power. I should have introduced myself. I'm Kim Vitelli. I'm the Administrator of the Office of Workforce Investment here at the Department of Labor. So our task here today is to really think about the various stakeholder perspectives on the skills challenge. So I'm just going to jump right in. We've got different questions that all of our panelists are going to answer, so that we can really get a taste for the kinds of things that we're going to tackle today. Dana, I'm going to start with you. From your perspective and this perspective of your stakeholders, all the data funders and data thinkers, what's the most pressing need for information with respect to skills?
Thanks, Kim. and thank you to the partners here at the Department of Labor for this invitation to join you this morning. So from where I sit, the most pressing need is to build education to employment data systems so that all of the stakeholders we're talking about, from learners to institution leaders to policymakers, have access to accurate information on employment outcomes to make informed decisions about post-secondary education and training. States have made substantial progress connecting education and employment data, but we face 3 critical gaps. So first, non-degree credentials. Short-term credentials, certificates, certifications are rapidly growing pathway for skill development. And many states are already collecting data on non-degree credential programs. That's real progress, but we still don't have consistent, comparable data on who is enrolling, who is completing these programs, what the competencies those credentials actually represent, and what the labor market returns are for different programs across different geographies. So the second would be occupational pathways. States are investing billions of dollars annually in education and training, but they can't answer fundamental questions like what kind of jobs do these program completers actually get? Not whether they're employed, we know that, but whether they're employed in something related to their training. And whether they're earning a pay rate in their location where they can actually support themselves and their families. So enhancing wage records by adding occupation, hours worked, and worker location would unlock insights into how skills acquired through education are actually translating into career success. So finally, the third would be learning mobility policies and systems. Some states are already empowering individuals to use their own verified education and employment achievements to navigate lifelong learning and connect to opportunity. But many more states need policies and data systems to capture skills and competencies acquired through education, to issue verified digital credentials, to enable individuals to then manage these credentials and use these skills and digital credentials in post-secondary placement, advancement, as well as connecting with employers and talent marketplaces. So I hope I've covered a broad gamut, but also left room for my panelists to respond to other gaps.
Thanks. I'm going to actually jump to Jeff next to respond to that. What's the most pressing need for information with respect to skills?
I think this is a very interesting question. I did a lot of work with a woman, Sharon Boyven, and others who, as we tried to figure out how to measure certificates and certifications, and we used to joke early in that effort that we didn't know what we didn't know. And I'm going to posit that we're close to that when it comes to skills. I don't know that we actually know what the hell we're talking about. And so, for example, let's take a look at the concept of underemployment, trying to identify if somebody's using their skills on the job. And the actual variance in estimates through different methods is between 52% and 26% for entry level, and that drops, all of those measures drop over time. Fed's measures around 30%. If we can't come to an agreement about how do we measure if someone's actually using their skills on the job, well, we have an awful lot in front of us, and so this makes this very exciting. There's a very big frontier, but we need to be clear that we really don't have a good measure. Secondly, when we talk about underemployment, it's only currently being used as a bludgeon against the BA, where in fact, if you look in the OECD, when they talk about this, they think about it as over, under, and rightfully credentialed. It actually can be applied to almost every level of education and training, and I think it's a very important metric, and I wish that the Brain Trust would come together and come to some common agreement about how it is that we would actually measure if somebody's skills are being used on the job. So take an American history major. Highest paid of the humanities, there's not many historian jobs. Why do they succeed, and what are we missing when we start to talk about skills? So then we move forward and we talk about ONET. Well, ONET I think is a wonderful tool, but do we actually know if somebody's in one of those jobs that they have the skills and knowledge and competencies that ONET would give us? No, we actually don't. And so we need to get closer to metrics to help us understand what's going on to the benefit of people finding the right place and using their talent so that they're as productive as possible moving forward. Taking this one step forward as we think about certificates and certification, which are the new hot, sexy currency, is I fear that we're creating a dichotomy where we think that we can create a world where everybody only has a portfolio of 27 skills, where in fact we're forgetting what really brings the American economy and makes it strong, which is a combination of general and specific skills. Few or no other countries do such a good job on providing a foundation of general skills and bringing specific skills. So if we take a look at certifications and certificates, there's about 37 million active certifications in the US labor market. Only 3% of the US labor market actually has those certifications as a standalone. If you look at how the certificates and certifications are being used, I believe that we're developing a new nonlinear model where people are taking their baseline education and adding something else on it across the career cycle. So are we making a mistake to create this competition between it has to be either skills or it's education, where in fact the US model is bringing them together, and we need to be thinking much more about what is the optimal combination of general and specific skills. Because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If you look, as my founding director of our center used to say, if we're so dumb, why are we so rich, right? So what we do in the US economy tends to work. And if you look at the Occupational Competency Clearinghouse model, which is one of my favorite products, we have a foundation of general skills and very specific skills near the labor markets. We need to look at this. We also need to look at how do they interact. Right? I've seen very little work, and especially even out of ONET, that helps us understand how it is combinations of skills, competencies work together to heighten productivity. And I'll point people in closing here to look at a paper called Revisiting the Risks of Automation. And in this paper, I forget the person who was the author, we had very high estimates about vulnerability to automation of about 40 million. And this person said, well, you know, that's only looking at central tasks. What happens if we actually look at the full portfolio of tasks that somebody has, and this really varies a lot by firm size. This took the vulnerability estimates on automation down to 8 million. So I think we really need to think about how these things work together, and you know, it's pushing the envelope, right? And so this is what's exciting about this work is we have a lot of unanswered questions in front of us that we need to address. So thank you.
I'm going to go to Jennifer next, and then Scott's going to bring us home. Jennifer, the most pressing information need with respect to skills.
What's
Yeah,
that? Oh, please.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying, Jeff. I think the most pressing need is really information that lets us challenge the way we've always done things. I think everyone would agree in this room that if we look back to even 2022, we never could have guessed where we'd be today, right? Where the economy would be, where advanced manufacturing has gone, where AI has gone with this economy, where we are in terms of how unemployment has fluctuated, where industries have grown and not grown. I think projecting the economy, I think if you did, maybe you'd be rich and you'd be off on some island somewhere. But certainly no one could have projected what's happened in the economy. So giving us information to challenge things differently. So I think we need tools to really throw at the canvas to let us do things differently and understand skills, understand credentials, activating and fast-tracking credentials differently. So right now we have what we have, and we need to be able to modernize things and use tools differently. So the data we have today isn't precise enough to pretty much give employers what they need to be able to make decisions. And that's where I feel like we are today. So let me give you an example from our company. I'm at Georgia Power, one of the largest utilities in the state of Georgia. I'm in economic development, so we help recruit companies to Georgia. So I'm going to speak from the employer standpoint and also from the economic development standpoint. On the economic development standpoint, we see what's happening on a macro scale because we see who's being recruited, what industries are growing, what's happening, who's strong, who's weak. On the Georgia Power side, we're one of the largest employers in the state of Georgia, employing. We employed over 2,000 people in 2025. We're going to increase almost 30% to 8,700 employees. up to today. So we're on track to increase 30% from 2023 to reach 8,700. Most of that is supporting the infrastructure work to grow our grid from this massive growth we're seeing and large-scale load. That's not just data centers, it's large manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. So hiring at scale at a tight labor market is a real challenge, and it forces us to be really creative. So we went to, let's take distribution. We went to our distribution, our senior vice president of HR went to our hiring general manager and said, hey, we need to do things different. There are not enough engineers, period, to be able to fill the engineering needs that we have to really make sure we can serve our customers and build our grid effectively. So what do? So we unpacked the job of what we needed. And looking at Georgia Tech on the ground, and they're one of the largest outputs of engineers in the country, they're not enough. It's not enough. They're test and design type engineers, and not the kind of engineers that we really need. We need field engineers. We need problem-solving engineers. We need customer service, more soft skills, troubleshooting type engineers. So when you unpack that, that's more of an associate engineer. So that's a different type of engineer. So it's more of an ONET, like what is that job? When you unpack all the skills of that job, so when you take that in two scopes, when you look at the pathway in the pipeline of that job and took that in two scales, we were hiring differently for that job. And we didn't need the type of engineer that we were initially hiring for. And that creative thinking of unpacking it from a skill set, and what does that look like, and we need to source that differently from different places, is allowing us to fulfill that role. And that's the kind of thinking and creative thinking that leads itself to different tools is allowing us to source that differently. And that goes all the way down to the K through 12, and thinking about that pathway and who do you need to partner with. And employers really driving that and driving that opportunity, but also being able to create that data and having access to that information in that data all the way to the end is really going to be helpful. And I think it really aligns with what Julia was saying and what we're all kind of saying in this room. We see the same pressure on the economic development side, and I really want to make sure I make this point because I am an economic developer. We continue to see a wave of mega projects. Think of the Hyundai Meta plant, one of the largest projects in economic development on the Savannah coast. They're making all of the cars, hybrid and EV cars. Mega projects are roughly defined as more than 500 to 1,000 jobs sitting at more than 1,000 acres. They are going to land in rural areas because they're looking for over 1,000 acres. So they are huge projects. They don't happen in urban areas because you're not going to find over 1,000 acres available in urban areas. You imagine the enormous pressure they put on rural areas when they land in those areas. The workforce is not there. So that pressure, they never seen anything like it. Suddenly, a region needs to source thousands of workers, do that quickly, all the way down to K through 12. And their current system our current system of sourcing that doesn't allow for that. How do they quickly address transitioning workers, seeing how that can work in the K through 12 system? How can they react if they can't really source those skills, understanding those career pathways all the way down to that, and be able to source that regionally? In Georgia, we had to take that from the Savannah coast all the way up to middle Georgia and think about that regional approach and think about childcare, transportation, all of the above. So it's thinking about how do we think locally, like Julia was saying, and how do we think about the skill sets and creating those programs and allowing us to tap into that information. So that information gap really becomes concrete when we think about the opportunity to enhance the wage record. I think about job titles, I think about hours worked added, the exact geography of where work is performed, rather than relying on SOC or NAICS code. We have a better understanding of what people are actually doing and where. Those job titles could feed a skills taxonomy that could let local economies gauge real-time supply and demand regionally. That's the kind of information that would let the communities respond to a mega project instead of being overwhelmed by one. We've seen that kind of overwhelmed in how we responded to it. So, and think about if we added credentials. I'm getting greedy now. You actually be able to value credentials. Yeah. So there's just so much opportunity. I think ONET is such an opportunity to expand and is the foundation to build on for sure. But I also think enhancing the wage record is is a dream that could be realized. I know the Workforce Information Council has been talking for over 10 years, and I still believe that dream can come true. So I'm going to be quiet now.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah.
Scott, state workforce agencies at the forefront, helping workers find jobs and employers find workers. What's the most important need for information with respect to skills?
So first of all, I'm Scott Sanders. I'm not Dr. Robert Magoo. I'm a pinch hitter, as they call it. So, or if you're in college basketball, I came out of the transfer portal. So first of all, today, to some extent, is like Back to the Future for me. Back in 2019, there was something called the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board that met, and several of you in the room participated in that, where we had employers, academia, public workforce folks, and we were talking literally about the same issues we are right now. So I think that's the thing, is we need to get the momentum and move forward. So from NASWA's perspective, states really sit at the center of this ecosystem, connecting employers, education, training providers, and workers. What we see clearly is that there isn't a lack of data. There's data everywhere. The problem is there's a lack of usable, connected, trusted, that's key, trusted and forward-looking skills data that can go across the systems in real time. And I think that's really where we need to take the step to actually create those building blocks. So what I think we really need is that real-time, trusted, forward-looking skills infrastructure, just not that better data to connect demand, supply, and outcomes across those systems. And I think when you look at that lack of a shared real-time interoperable view, which is a word I really didn't hear about until back in 2019, now it's used a lot, of taking those skills and translating them across education, workforce programs, as well as employers. But the problems you get into is that translation to the timing, to the trust, to the structure. So employers right now, they use their job posting to describe their needs, not actually what predicts success, as we heard from Julia when she was talking about that piece. So, and then resumes, or now they're called LERs, but they were called ILRs back in 2019, to describe those worker skills that aren't visible or comparable across multiple systems. So our system relies on, what else? Surveys, which are always lagging in time. And then we also have limited leveraging of those real-time demand signals, and we need to prepare those individuals and training programs for those skills development, which are also lagging. So we then need to define what are those emerging skills needed. And so it kind of rolls back into that true need for the shared, real-time, reliable skills, language, or source. And we've heard it talked about common skills language. And I'll debate a little bit later, maybe on wage records. What are enhanced wage records? Is it one field added, two? Is it 17? What is it? So I think we need to get to that as well. But you need that common skills level, or skills language. You need those forward-looking insights. We need to really take advantage of those job postings. We happen to have one in our backyard. The National Labor Exchange has been operating a National Labor Exchange research hub. We have been gathering job postings since 2010, and now are making it available to folks for research and predictions. So how do we build that out so it's available to job seekers as well? And so we really need to then be able to connect that with what are the skills that folks are coming out of education institutions and credentialing. What are the skills that are matched up with that? So then we can truly match them all together. And I know AI might play a role in that, but it's how to use that, I guess, would be the key. And then obviously you get into the whole taxonomies. So they're flexible enough to incorporate those changes, make it a trusted, structured network that all can use. And I think that's the key, is everybody has to be able to use it. Because if we get fragmented, then maybe we're regional, but not national. So how does it really need to be set up? So that, I think, would then incorporate both the states, the workforce systems, the employers, the education and training providers, and then most importantly, those learners and workers. So really what we come down to is across all these stakeholders, we have that unmet need is coherence. So we have to be able to describe, translate, and then act on those skills consistently across this ecosystem to really connect all of those that are involved.
Trusted single source is what.
Trusted single source?
Is
Yeah.
what's lacking,
That's
yeah,
right.
on the skills side.
You have to be the trusted broker.
That's right, that's right.
I want to recognize that this beautiful room is also a little bit echoey, and so like normal everyday things that are happening behind the curtain are like ricocheting all around the room. So just incorporate that into your consciousness. And I might ask Jennifer to pull your microphone a little bit closer, or when you're talking, just lean in a little bit more. Okay, so we heard about how we define things, how we might then use those definitions to tell what is going on, and then use that information to decide what to do next. And so I want to move to the next question, and I'm going to start here. Jennifer, I'm going to go back to you. What are the practical consequences of these information needs going unmet?
Yeah, the consequence is pretty straightforward for us. The stakes are high. If we can't get this right, we can't serve our customers from the Georgia Power side. Without the right skills, we can't build or operate our grid. And without the grid, there's no power. No power means no economic development. No economic development means no jobs, no investment, no growth. That's our risk. So my answer is pretty short. Yeah.
Dana, what would you say?
I would think about that the most severe and practical consequence is actually for the learner in terms of credit mobility and credit for prior learning. That, like Jeff said, learners are, their pathways are non-linear now. They're cycling between education and employment, and when higher education institutions can't systematically assess the competencies that those students already possess, or assess the credits they've earned at other institutions, those learners are going to face credit loss, and then they may be forced to pay to relearn content that they already know. So if they're sitting through coursework that's going to add hours or weeks or months to their time to completion, maybe they'll take on additional debt to finance that education. And that extended time to completion can inflate the true cost of higher education through both that increased direct cost, but also the loss of earning potential, and exacerbate the challenges they have with responsibilities outside of work if they're juggling work and school. So policies and data systems, these policies and data systems that don't recognize skills that learners are bringing from outside education, then disproportionately penalize adult learners and even veterans who have extensive real-world experience. So I think about putting the learner at the center of this work and how we can build systems to recognize what they're already bringing with them.
Thanks, Dana. Scott, what do you think? Consequences of the information needs going unmet, especially for states?
There's probably a lot. We could probably ask the room, might come out with more, but I think a couple things. Misaligned investments in education and training. I know my WLMI folks will like this one: labor market friction and persistent skills gaps, slower economic growth, lost productivity. Workers are screened out, and I know my son, who is a Kellogg grad, is going through this, looking for a new job, not because they lack the skills, because those skills are invisible, are difficult to actually translate. So somebody coming out being out of the U.S. Naval Academy, being the strike officer, which means defense systems, attack systems, but how do you translate it into the real world common language? I think reduced economic mobility and underemployment, something we don't talk a lot about is that true underemployment in the U.S. Incomplete understanding how education and training to skills and earnings outcomes, especially when individuals go across state lines. There's that no communication across state lines. I know that from working in Indiana and trying to work with Illinois and Ohio and Kentucky. When the systems aren't fully connected to that real-time piece, users don't receive the most relevant local and actionable guidance. So we see that happen a lot. And to me, this isn't just a skills gap, this is really a systems gap. And it kind of is broad reaching all the way into the wage records, into the colleges and education systems as well. So.
Thanks, Scott. Jeff, what do you think?
I think the big fear about not having good data systems is that we're going to just be relying on storytelling. Often when we do have data, we still rely on storytelling. So, you know, if we take a look right now, employers might make a complaint about being unable to fill a job. It'd be really great to have all the rejected resumes compared to the job ad to really understand what is the misalignment and to really verify that the skills are not in those resumes. I don't know one way or another. We storytell when it comes, thinking about real-time data. Right now we have it out there, but seldom do we look at the reliability statistics on there, and seldom are they available. So we're using data maybe a little bit blindly. We need to improve our data systems and be a bit more skeptical about how we use data. And then thinking about enhanced wage records, which I've been a big proponent of for a long time, I think that we have a challenge before us, which is calling for more data without demonstrating why it's going to be valuable. And so I've seen too many cases where people want to add an additional decimal point without trying to prove where the value lies. And so with the idea of bringing occupation onto wage records, it's really critical for us to understand our work, our education and training investments, because occupation is what you do with your education. You don't do industry is where you work. So we have to face the fact that our UI system is industry-based, and for various reasons. If we want to move forward, we have to get those data, but not just call for more data. We need to demonstrate why it's useful. And I'm working with a number of states who have brought occupation onto their wage record, and that's where they're at. They've got it now. It's kind of, it's a dog that caught the car problem. It's kind of a now what? How do we do this? How do we make it useful? And this is where I'm always surprised why Alaska isn't at the table, because they're the one state that has had occupation on the wage record for the longest in the nation. They've used it. They've got some really great tools, and they at least could be kind of a mentor about what has gone wrong, what was useful. Sure, Alaska's a different place and got grizzly bears and all this stuff, but they've actually thought about this problem for a really long time, and they've made use of it on a use case basis, right? And that's what we need to do as we move forward with the new systems, if we got them. So,
I'm hearing both the impact on employers and sort of what the implications are for the economy, the impact on learners and what that means for worker mobility. I'm hearing sort of where those things come together, both misalignment and friction if we miss the opportunity, and then like a chance for us to just like not even know how to diagnose what's happening so that we can get to the better match. So I wonder then if the needs for information about skills were met. I mean, if we were just living in this really data-wealthy environment where we knew and could measure everything that we wanted to, then how would decision-making look different? Dana, I'm going to start with you for this one.
Sure. So I'll pick up again with the learner. That a learner who had verified digital credentials documenting their skills and competencies could walk into a hiring process or into a college or university and say, here's what I know, here's where I learned it, here's evidence that I can do what those skills are talking about. And they're not asking an employer or an admissions officer or a program director to take their word for it. They have the data will speak for them. And to build off of Scott's point about state-level policymakers, I think having better proxies for skills in occupational data and jobs would help states answer two fundamental questions that they can't right now. Is education and training producing occupation-aligned employment? And then where are there talent shortages, and are we building the pipelines to fill those at the occupational level? So with those proxies for skills, policymakers could better allocate resources and align education with labor market needs.
That's really helpful. Jennifer, what do you think? How would decision-making look different if we just had all the information that we wanted?
I think it would be faster, and it would be much more efficient. So I think we could find and source the right talent and skill sets and help workers transition between skill sets and raise incomes for that transitioning workforce where there's a genuine skill match. And in that world, I think AI wouldn't be a disruptor. It wouldn't be a threat. It would be a complement. So if we can match skills to value precisely at the right time, the technology becomes an accelerator rather than a threat. We talk a lot about AI in that respect. So I think about my own job. We've used transition skill sets in economic development to find talent or source talent in areas where a company's coming to an area and we didn't actually have the particular job they were looking for. We had a bioscience company coming to a particular region in North Georgia, and what we found is that that food processing, the skill set match of food processing was very similar to the lab work that they were doing in that particular lab. So we're able to doing a skill match, and we're able to recruit that company because there was a 90% skill match in food processing to the lab work, and they came to Georgia, and they were able to employ food processing workers. So there's an example. There's another example where an e-commerce worker, a London-based e-commerce that employing 1,000 people, we were able to show them that actual food clerks had a 90% skill match, and that raised the income for these people. And they actually have expanded now. They're employing another 500 people at this particular area in a very disadvantaged area in Atlanta. So it works, and it does raise incomes. So it's a really successful thing to do. And if we had more information like this, I think it would be really helpful.
And Scott, what about for states? How would decision-making look different?
It would change a lot. I'm going to kind of feed off of a comment he made. Take a look at Arkansas. Since I'm pinch hitting for Arkansas, I'll give it a plug. They've got Arkansas Launch that's really has taken off, and it's really taking all these pieces and pulling it together. And I think because there's a commitment within the state to pull in academia, to pull in employers, to pull in workers, to pull in the public workforce system. And I think that's kind of given them a leg up to some extent. And Dr. Magoo was kind enough to give me about 6 different legal-size handouts, but I don't have enough for the room, so you'll have to email me later for those. But it's really interesting to look at their perspective, and it feeds off of different categories of workers, all the way down to K-12, youth, adult, reentry, everything else. But on finding what really, if these things are met, I think we get back to that real-time, local, actionable skills. I think part of it is happy to share the National Labor Exchange Research Hub that could help out. It gives us the ability to look at emerging skills, tools, technologies. I think there's also the interoperability and shared data infrastructure. We've been working with many of the states in the room, Missouri, Arkansas, Ohio, North Carolina, Indiana, New Jersey, on a multi-state data collaborative, because states are great working within their own state. It's crossing that state line. It is a real struggle. And so we've got some opportunities, I think, there if we can kind of build that bridge over to the other side of the state or a new state. I think that's key. And then really, we haven't touched on it, but really kind of that skills-based talent marketplace. And I think moving away from, here's my resume, here's my job posting, it matches. It's really what are the skills I have on each side, and really pulling all those together to really validate those skills, recognize those skills, look at what a job seeker is really offering, and making sure that the employers actually change their mindset and go, this is what I really need. Not just saying, oh, these are the skills I need, but then go back to the resume and go, oh, they don't have a degree from X, Y, or Z. So, and I think that will really give us the ability to give us those clear real-time pathways with stackable credentials, and then training can truly be visible, and then those going into training can see the results.
I mean, I hear a lot of what you're talking about that also sort of like strengthens and echoes what Dana was talking about. Jeff, how about you? What do you think, how could decision-making look different if we're in this super data-rich environment?
Well, the one thing I'd like to focus on here is the concept of career pathways. Currently, every time I hear about career pathways, I see that they seldom extend beyond the halls of the academy. We don't really do career pathways in the labor market, so if we had these improved data systems, we might be able to better understand how it is that people move through the labor market and what gets them stuck. So why is it that 75% of workers in low-wage jobs stay in a low-wage job? What is it about the transition? We have an economy that's built on job churn. There's an average about 12.5 jobs across the career cycle, and people hit the market and they move. What is it that makes successful pathways? We really don't know. And so by being able to bring a particular occupation and skills into here, we might be able to really follow what's happening along the juncture. Is it just random? right? So if you look at a human capital regression, education does not explain that much about what happens to people's wages and productivity in the labor market. Hits it at entry, but we don't know an awful lot about what happens as we move forward. So getting this information, we could actually extend this concept of career pathway into the labor market and have a better understanding about what junctures happen in the labor market that lead people to succeed, find economic mobility, or fall into a low wage trap. And I think very important if we're talking about using education as a leveling to help people find economic opportunity. What is it that hinders it, and what is it that helps us?
I mean, I hear here, if we had all the information about skills that we needed, we'd be able to better allocate resources. We'd have faster and more efficient business decisions. We'd be, identifying career pathways and all the little junctions that make it a career pathway, and people being able to transition there, and really have like a skills-based labor economy and be able to identify what occupations are growing, like where the puck is going, and not only sort of identify where it's going, but then how to get people there. So obviously tantalizing, right? We would all want to be able to do that. I'm going to shift to sort of questions that our speaker panel doesn't know I'm going to ask, because we have the time to do that. So these might be shorter answers, and I'll let people sort of volunteer about who goes first rather than put you on the spot. But if there was, from your own perspective, you're all here representing different sort of stakeholders and different levels of expertise. If there was one thing that you wanted sort of your team to do next, what would that thing be? Like, what do you think that other employers should be doing in order to get to this place where we're, have the data that we need, building the data? What's like sort of one next step for researchers, for states, for employers? Anyone want to go first?
I'll throw out a challenging piece. Is I am very surprised that we at least don't hear enough about internal time to productivity analysis. What is happening inside the firms that move from interview to time to productivity to stable hire, successful hire? What is actually going on there, and why don't we hear more of it? Is it because it's proprietary business information? Is there a way to break through that? Is there a way to get that information shared? I mean, I've heard stories working with the Chamber, with McDonnell Douglas doing some great work in this area. So why don't we get more of it? Why isn't it there? Because they've got the info, right? They're at that really task level. They're at that job title level, which is much more granular than we have at occupation, right? So how do we crack that one open now?
I think to some extent there's a mind shift that has to happen. And I know because I was in Seattle all last week, and then when I got home, my wife and I walked our dog, and I was just talking about, because we had a discussion at our board about skills, and I said, so if you took your position and re-described it into skills, what would they be? And it kind of took her back a little bit, and she's got her master's degree, and it was something she had never really thought about. And I said, well, what are things you do? Why are you successful? And I think that's where we talk about it, but we never really do anything about it. And I think that's where we need to have a shift. And I know, at least Jennifer, I've known her a number of years, they've taken that step, but really to get employers to do that as well, get out of using applicant tracking systems, which most employers use, that really looks at the resumes and kind of use AI to screen it out. It's not really looking for skills. It's looking for, does it check the box for this degree or this degree? And I think it's a mind shift that really has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, when I'm looking to hire, I tell people I'm looking for intense curiosity about things, passion that's coming out for this is your path. Like, what's on your resume tells me that what linking you to this job shows me that all the steps have led to this job. And you can see it, and I'm looking for somebody that has just get things done. I want to use another word in there I'm not going to use. So that they are somebody that just intensely gets things done. So, and it can be not, if they come to that with a job, they're going to do it. Like, they don't go to sleep until it's going to keep them up at night if they don't get it done. So, and that curiosity can lend itself to success in any realm. And I have some of the most innovative, passionate people on my team that I have the pleasure and privilege of leading. And those things aren't necessarily knowledge or skills. So when I say we need to creatively think of different ways to do things, I think it goes to a lot of these skills that are hard to define too, to your point. Unpacking that job and what ONET does is so important, but some of these things are really hard to define as well in terms of hiring. But hiring is getting much harder. And some of the top companies, my parent company is Southern Company, which is a Fortune 100 company. And modernizing the hiring process, even at the top companies, it's pretty slow, needs to be, all of us need to think about modernizing, and I think skill sets and all of these things it takes a lot longer than it needs to do that. So I think all of this would help us all. I have pushed our senior vice president of HR kind of like even about succession planning in some of our largest companies. If you could take the skill sets as people are onboarded, take the skill sets of those people, and then have some kind of AI function that takes like the skill sets of me, and then something says, oh, Jennifer would be good at this role within this large company. So it allows people to understand succession planning within the job. Because young people come on and they don't understand in this big company where else they could be successful. I mean, it could apply to so many things, not just the labor market, but helping people move within large companies, even Department of Labor. So it's an opportunity for so many things.
I would echo Scott's point on use the data, and Jeff challenged states that have enhancements to actually use them, and there are some states, and I see a lot of them in the room, that are actively working to put the enhancements they have to use. I know South Carolina has efforts underway, Indiana's working on things, West Virginia is as well. I think I heard Washington might be here. They just published a brief that's actually using their occupational enhancements to show some of these pathways. So that's great that when states can do that, but those of us that are data folks in the room also need to remember to be patient. Yeah. The first couple quarters, maybe years of a new data collection, there's gonna be some quality challenges. It's gonna take a while until we know how to use that data well and answer some of these questions we have. So we need to be excited, but balance that with patience.
I want to echo on that patience. When we did the work with certificates and certification, Sharon Boyven, who led the effort, said, oh, it's going to take us 5-6 years. But you end up very reliable metrics. And the same with Washington State, the folks I've been dealing with there, they're still at that, how accurate is the information that we're getting in. But in 5 years from now, they're going to be really, really good. And I know that all the other states, I agree, they're doing great work, but we got to be patient.
I think that companies are really, because of the urgency of needing so many people with these mega projects I was talking about, hiring thousands of people, accelerating and fast-tracking credentials and programming with the needs right now is really, really important. I think Georgia's doing that really well. And I'm not sure how well other states are doing it in terms of fast-tracking credentials and mini credentials to get people employable right away. But that's, identifying what those mechanics, electricians, all of these advanced manufacturing needs are. I'm not sure how many other states are doing it, but that's definitely huge right now in this economy, especially with data centers and electricians being consumed very quickly with this push towards all of that infrastructure investment.
So I'm hearing both the kind of data that needs to exist in the environment, so people are sort of putting their resources in the right place, but also I'm hearing a thread here about like the decision, like the hiring decision, still being very cloudy, and sort of having to be able to like make the best of what you've got. I mean, Jennifer, you talked about what I loved, what you said was not just sort of what's like real concrete there, but also like your view into what skills might just emerge from this person as they exist in this environment and apply these skills. And it sounded a little bit like some evidence, right, and a little bit of a gut, but that hiring point is sort of like where this all comes together. We hear a lot about we plan to talk a lot about skills-based hiring. Is there an ingredient that could be like what one thing would make skills-based hiring easier? Or maybe take out even the skills hiring. What one thing would make hiring decisions better? And it's not that you haven't talked about it yet, but I wonder if anyone wants to like name just one more thing to put on the table about that decision point. We can also move on to another question.
I will just say, I don't know if anyone wants to like just say this, but the beauty of AI and what we have today is that it can create amazing dashboards. I'm sorry, Department of Labor, but you know, your data is hard to pull in and all the things, all the wonderful columns that you have that I've worked with for 30 years. I can push a button now, and I can have a beautiful dashboard that puts maps and stuff, and I use GIS and ArcGIS and all the things, but it comes in, and it's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in the world. I can QCW for 20 years, make a map, make a bar graph, all the stuff comes in, quarterly, yearly, boom, it's there. So talk about if we can do, you know, combine ONET with this and that, and we can have beautiful dashboards with AI. So I mean, we're in a moment now, if we can get this data right, we can have people pushing buttons and using your data, and there's no complaints about how it can come in. I mean, this is a huge opportunity. So I just think, I'm just gonna say, if we can get this, we can use AI as our friend to allow people to use the data and adopt it. Huge adoption with AI, being able to use this
I think maybe your skills hiring to be objective, not subjective. I think that's a key, because I know there's bias that always goes into hiring. I don't care what anybody says, and there's also bias in AI. So part of it is, can we make it where it's truly objective and you really know what those person's skills really are? I think that's the other hard thing. I mean, it's no different than you can say you went to this school or that school, but if you didn't, or got that credential, but if you never checked it out, you wouldn't know, are they telling the truth or not? So I think that's the same thing on the skill side. Then how do you test that and then bring it in and then match it up? And then move them into somewhere else if they're not the right fit. So.
The one thing I would also throw in, I think we need to revisit the idea of signaling theory. Too often people say signal as though it's a bad thing. If you actually look at labor market efficiency, we need mechanisms to help us summarize information. And if you look to the work of Michael Spence, who was credited with inventing signaling theory in his Nobel Prize speech, he said, "I never meant this to say that education had no value. I mean, it carries a signal, and signals make markets efficient." And so as we move towards skill-based, and if you think there's 7,000 certification providers in the United States, and I don't know how many certifications they provide, how are you going to sort through all that information? There is a time that a signal is actually a helpful thing. So let's stop always saying it as though it is a negative, where in fact it can be a very positive thing.
I mean, I'm hearing bringing the data together, truing it up, and being able to like rely on signals. It's ultimately what we've got. Is there something, we talked about what employers could do, what learners could do. Are there specific requests? Not that this is like a list that we'll definitely fulfill, but like, are there specific requests that you would have of the Department of Labor or Congress or another agency? But like, what should like government do? Government, we're here to help. We're the government, we're here to help. Like, what do you want the help with?
Do we have a day and a half? No.
A year and a half.
The challenge has always been bringing data to local side. I mean, that's always, I think we talked about that. Julia talked about that and others. That people need data locally. Talked about the weather. You don't want to know what it is somewhere else when you're local. That's why everyone buys subscriptions, like Lightcast and other data, because we're trying to purchase the data locally. When I'm in economic development and someone's prospects coming to Savannah or Atlanta, I'm not going to be like, here's the US data for unemployment. That's not really helpful. They want to know the county or the region and the city and the population and the drive time, radius, all the things within what they're looking at of that site or business. So they want all the local information. So we're going to use the subscription data. And everyone doesn't like the way subscriptions take your data and change it. But we don't have any other choice. So is there anything that you can do to give us local data that we can use? So that's an ask that you could bless.
Yeah, I'd like to see him, lean in on, start from the occupational competency clearinghouse models. When we start talking about skills, there's part of the conversation that says that the BA and other education is worthless. And so how many people in here in the room have a BA or higher? Raise your hand. How many of you think it was a waste of time? Not very many.
Yeah, somebody
And-
went like that.
Yeah, okay, so on the edge. And so I think we really need to figure out a resolution to how it is that our education system works and where it doesn't work. And so what kind of combination. So I did a talk for a certifications body, and their board was trying to decide, it was a financial certification. Did they need the BA or did they not need the BA? And it's not something that I could answer for them in their requirements for their particular certifications, but they could, right? So do you have a baseline set of skills? And I think that Department of Labor, maybe in combination with Ed, can help address this question. Where is it that that foundational set of skills is the secret sauce of American economic vitality? We do stuff different than other people do, and guess what? It works. So why does it work and where does it fail? And we need to do a lot more there.
But do you employ people without a bachelor's degree?
Do I? No, but not because of any kind of degree requirement. It's just everything is, an analytic position. So most of the people coming in will have had those skill sets. So you don't learn how to do stata or regression analysis in high school, right? So most of that is going to come from the BA or higher.
I hear states race too, and I know colleagues at the Department of Labor have publicly stated that states should enhance their wage records, but states have conveyed that they need to see that in writing. Knowing that it was said at a public meeting isn't as helpful for them convincing their colleagues that this is a worthwhile and supported idea. And I know I'm representing a foundation, but the other challenge is funding. That enhancing wage records for states with antiquated systems can be millions of dollars. There are some states that have been lucky and it's not as expensive, but there's the technical work, and then there's the staffing to do all of the data quality checks and maintain that process over a long term.
But if we could first come up with the common definition of what are enhanced wage records, because I think that's the problem. ADP put out kind of a slideshow at the UWC conference in Salt Lake City about a month ago, and I was there, where they had the different states and all the different variables they were pulling into enhanced wage records, and very few are the same, yet some, like say Mississippi has 8, but another state has 5, and they're like, well, you can't change mine, you can't change mine. So I think part of it is to get on that common of what would then satisfy all the needs for everybody and let states enhance it farther if they want to. But I think she's got hit the nail on the head, is not only it's funding for states to be able to do it, but there's also people's interpretations of the legal requirements or limits. And because a lot of the wage records sit in a unemployment insurance shop, their statutes don't allow them to take that and apply it over to other areas. And so then you also end up with an attorney's interpretation in one agency is different than the interpretation in another one. And I know this because I helped set up the Indiana workforce system a long time ago, where you had to get the attorneys to finally all agree before you could ever go do anything else. So I think that's part of it, is maybe that's a good convening group as well to do, is really kind of common requirements. So, and then funding to go with it. So.
Yeah, and actually to throw one other piece in, workman's compensation has occupation on it. No one then knows where this data is, and it would help a large number of states actually bring occupation onto their wage record without having an additional reporting requirement. The code is different than our SOC, but we can get over that. I think that what happens is they collect the money and they throw the occupational code away, which makes a lot of sense because you just want to have it in a workman's compensation fund, but it would really help. It's there, they collect it, they throw it away or something, because I've talked to like 17 states and nobody knows where the data is. So DOL might actually know.
But also you need to define on wage records, do you need daily wage records? Is it weekly?
Yeah.
Is it monthly? Is it quarter? I know right now it's all quarterly, and the quarterly comes in 45 days after the end of the quarter, so it's really old. And so to me, most of firms use payroll providers or TPAs. They've got the data. The problem is they want the employers to pay them to then actually pass it along. So I think to get employers on board with the reason to have enhanced wage records, I think really would push the agenda a lot faster to be able to get to what we all want to see happen. So
These are all really good. Okay, last question. What was your first job, and what from it do you still use in your current job?
Good. What was the last
I want
part?
you all to think about
What
this
was
too.
your first job?
What was your very first job? For me, it was like babysitting. And what do you still use now from that job?
My first job was delivering papers, and I learned not to break windows anymore.
So mine was babysitting
Okay.
and being like really clear about what you wanted to have happen next. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll share my favorite story about this, though, is I got a journalist request 50 years after I delivered papers from the very paper I delivered in West Virginia. So,
Full circle.
I worked at the Ponderosa, and I wore this really big green triangle skirt, polyester skirt. And I learned to be nice even if someone placed a quarter into my hand and said, "Thank you, you're the best waitress ever."
Good skill. Good skill.
So I worked at Blue Drummer Steakhouse, kind of funny, but I started out as dishwasher, moved up to potato boy, and then moved up to burger chef, in essence, to do burgers. And so what it taught me is always strive to go a little bit higher, but you got to be patient, and the customer's always right no matter what. So.
Yeah.
I cleaned bird cages at
Oh.
an aviary, so not to be afraid of the grunt work.
I like that.
All right, so we have a networking break coming up next, and if you're not sure how to begin your conversation, can I offer you that? Steve, any particular instructions? People need to be back here by 11:15, is that right? Or is there anything you want to say before everyone runs away?
Sure, I'll run up here. We're going to be 15 minutes early starting the break, so I propose that we also be 15 minutes early coming back from the break. So the break will be half an hour, start at 10:30, come back at 11. We'll get a little ahead of schedule, and probably that means a longer lunch. So a couple things. One, I want to reiterate what Kim said about microphones. There may or may not be a tiny little construction project that happens in the lobby where they need to replace one machine with another. They're going to try to delay, but I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. The other thing I wanted to mention was a couple folks have mentioned like handouts, papers, whatever. We are trying to accumulate things from speakers or whoever else might want to have materials that you want highlighted. So when we do sort of an after meeting, report, we can include links, we can include those things, especially if they're online. So definitely, especially if you're speaking, give us those things. I'm also, just because I have the microphone, I'm going to answer your last question because I like to tell the story. My first job was, I was a Little League umpire, and I was like 15, 16 years old. It was like the first job I ever drove myself to. And the thing that I still carry with me today was like there was a close call at first base, and I was like, out? And afterwards, instead of like screaming at me, one of the like players' dads came up to me afterwards. He's like, look, nobody knows if he was out or safe. All that matters, it's literally, there's no like instant replay. All that matters is you sound like you know what you're talking about. So that was my 15-year-old lesson. But I think let's go take a break. And there's a coffee shop in the lobby. There's a snack bar on the 6th floor. Be back here at 11.
Thank you, panel.
Okay, everybody, 5-minute warning. We're going to start at 3 minutes after 11, 5 minutes from now. And hopefully they hold off on like banging and rattling in the lobby. They've got sort of instructions. And to be fair, they scheduled theirs before we scheduled ours, but we have 150 people. So. Okay, 1 minute. Everybody find your way to your seats. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our second plenary session of the day. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, and I think the plan is going to be we'll go to lunch a little bit early so we're not quite as squeezed for lunchtime. And I'd like to welcome that panel to the stage and turn things over to Dr. Ken Poole as the moderator. Oh yeah, that's Ken's chair. I'm right behind. This panel has promised me that they'll be calm and docile, so let's see how they do.
Good luck with that. testing the mic and making sure you're still there. Good morning, everybody. All right, we'll wake it up here a little bit. So first of all, my name is Ken Poole. I run a group called the Center for Regional Economic Competitiveness, which is a nonprofit. We've been around for a quarter century here, focused around trying to build bridges between education, economic development, and higher ed, and workforce development, really using data to drive decision-making in a way that had never been done before at that particular period. And I've really watched as the data infrastructure has become a centerpiece of the conversation, and we were doing it back when it wasn't for the cool kids. So I'm really pleased that I also remember early days of ONET, for example, and using it in places where they're like, this is the coolest thing since sliced bread. And now today we're saying, okay, the sliced bread is getting a little stale and we need to be paying attention to what's the next generation look like. And we know that the workforce system is increasingly needing, I believe the word is timely, local, and actionable. Is that right? Is that? And also, I'm hearing that skills-based is an important piece of that equation. But what we're really trying to do today is to identify some practical ways for ETA to help support a stronger national skills-based data infrastructure. Did I get that right? Building on what exists while also encouraging innovation in the next generation. So that's really our focus today. We've got 4 objectives for this session because we're very ambitious. First, we want to really do a better job of trying to articulate this problem. So as we face how skill data that is all over the place might be actually used to understand what's going on in the labor market. We want to look at the tools that we have, and we're going to spend a little bit more time focusing on that, and what they are and why they're not really meeting our needs, and offer some ideas about how they might address those problems. And then maybe suggest some ways for ETA to help. And we recognize that we're in an environment in which we have some constraints. So we want to be very pragmatic about what those suggestions are. So I want to first introduce our panel, most of whom don't need an introduction, but I'll do so anyway. And I'm going to start here on the left with Dr. Julia Lane, who's Professor Emerita from New York University Wagner School of Public Service, and swears she's retired. Julia is an innovator in advancing data for public good, and with a focus on helping us find new ways to answer relevant problems and relevant questions with the data that we have right in front of us. And next to her is Matt Siegelman, who's president of the Burning Glass Institute. And Matt is a pioneer in unlocking insights from big data, as we used to call it. Now we don't call it that anymore, including job postings, resume data, and other real-time sources. And then next we have Chris Mullen, who is strategy director of data and measurement for the Lumina Foundation, and he's a leader in advancing data collection and measurement approaches to guide investment decisions that lead to economic mobility. That's really where his area of interest is. And then last but certainly not least is Ben Zweig, from CEO of Revelio Lab. Sorry, I was not going to get his name wrong, but I'm going to get his company wrong. Sorry. Which is a workforce, and Ben is a workforce intelligence leader who's using AI to basically create a universal HR database using public data sources. Is that basically a way to describe your mission? All right. Yeah. So what I wanted to do is ask each of our partners here to really talk to us a little bit about, we've heard a little bit today about skills as a building block for understanding where our labor market assets. And when I talk about skills, I'm going to go with the broad definition that Steve gave us, and so we don't argue about that. And we're trying to use that to map what companies are looking for. And of course, we're in this challenging world where we don't really have it structured on either side of the map, either side of the match, and that's creating some major challenges for us. So what problem are we really trying to solve with the skills data, and what information gaps are we trying to that's going to bring us together? And I want to start maybe with Ben, since he's down on the other end of the table. and ask him a little bit about ONET specifically, because it is kind of a foundational skill data asset that we have. And we've had it around for many years, but it doesn't seem to be doing what we want it to do. So, Ben, what do you see as the role of ONET in trying to address this? First of all, help me with that problem definition of what are we trying to solve with skills, and how can ONET, as it currently functions, or maybe as it should be functioning, help us get at that?
Yeah, it's a big question, so I'm glad we're all here to solve it. So I want to echo what Julia opened with, that ONET's been a very invaluable part of the modern economy. But just to, with that caveat, I want to focus on the limitations and maybe an idea for what it could be. So the main limitation of ONET, as I see it, is that it's not used by firms. What companies do today, they all need their own internal structure. They need taxonomies of occupations, skills, work activities, seniority levels. They all need it. And what they do is they go to firms like Mercer, Willis Towers Watson, Deloitte, whatever, and they spend millions of dollars to create an internal custom taxonomy that is obsolete in a few years, does not have interoperability, does not map over to the market, does not cross over to anything. And that is the state of the world right now. Now, I know we've heard this trifecta of, timely, local, and actionable. Timely and actionable, fine, we can agree on what that means. I want to broaden the definition of what we mean by local. So I think we've been talking about local as kind of having local through a geographic lens. But I want to make the argument that companies need something way more local. They have way more idiosyncratic needs than a geography. If you are NVIDIA, you don't care about the distinction between doctors and nurses. That should be buried way down in the depths of whatever taxonomy you're using. But you care a lot about the distinction between different types of hardware engineers. And that applies for occupations, that applies for skills. So you can't use a universal taxonomy that is not designed for local needs. That is a non-starter if you're a firm. So what should, that's like a problem. So what we do, we kind of come into companies and sell job architecture projects. We say, we'll map we'll apply, a taxonomy to occupation, skills, seniority levels, activities. Those are kind of the four things that we apply. And then, make sure that those are hierarchically flexible, that they're adaptive, that you can apply them into systems, you can integrate, you can infer that on new data that comes in out of sample, new postings, whatever it is. So that is what happens already, and ONET is just not involved in that process. So I think that's like a tragedy that I want to address, that we don't have a common language because firms are left out of the loop. In terms of what ONET should be, I want to, just because I can't help myself as an academic economist, I want to go back to Econ 101 that I'm sure you've all heard. The factors of production in the economy are capital and labor. Now, if we think about the allocation of capital, it's very, very scientific. And labor markets are not. No one's making HBO shows about, workforce development, but they are making that about finance. It is a sophisticated market. And part of the reason why is because we have armies of people that categorize information for financial markets. They're called accountants. We live next to them. We all know who they are, and they're there to categorize information so that markets can use that so that we can compare companies to companies. And they do that because there is a financial accounting standards board. There's generally accepted accounting principles. There are governing structures in place to make sure that people are speaking the same language. I think that is what ONET could be and should be. And I think if we can accomplish that, then labor markets can be as sophisticated and as advanced as capital markets, which would be a big accomplishment in my mind.
So, Ben, real quickly,
Can I interrupt?
Sure.
I thought accountants existed to make economists look like they had a personality.
Oof, shots fired.
But somebody's got to count it. But but in this sort of environment in which we're tapping into real-time data, and you know, the accountants are basically the ones who are tracking the real-time, you know, financing. So what do you see as ONET's role then? Does that mean we're going to need an army of labor accountants?
So I think we have eclipsed that because of the technology that we have that's out there. I mean, just a personal story. You know, in 2016, so 10 years ago, I was experimenting with large language models. At the time, it was Word2Vec and Doc2Vec, which were like the state of the art at the time, creating a skills taxonomy for IBM. I was running workforce analytics at IBM, creating this internal taxonomy without any human in the loop, just using large language models, you know, which were, you know, at the frontier of where we were in 2016. And it blew people's minds. I mean, that is the skills taxonomy that IBM uses to this day. It's 400,000 people. It's a big workforce. And that was incredible at the time. And to say that large language models have advanced in the last 10 years would be an insane understatement. We all know that they've advanced in the last 10 years. I mean, it's all anyone's talking about in the world. We don't need human beings to decide what skills are similar to other skills, what job titles belong with other job titles, how skills and occupations crosswalk to each other. We are way past that in the life cycle of modern technology. So I think ONET should not be developing taxonomies. I think it should be, you know, managing technology, managing what's already out there by technology solutions, by technology providers, managing what's out there in the private sector, be kind of a governor to some degree, be governing what exists in the world. I think that is.
So that's helpful.
Yeah.
I will say, and this is like a perfect setup for you, Julia, I think, because and as you know, one of the biggest concerns we have about AI isn't so much what it can do, but what it misses. And a big part of that is like, what's the quality of the stuff going in? Because, you know, I'm going to quote myself here. Somebody heard me say this earlier. The problem is we're often matching crap with crap. You know, the data that's in job postings are developed by people who oftentimes don't even really know what the job is, and it's often based on the last job description that was out there. And at the same time, the people who are applying for those jobs are rewriting their resumes and or rewriting their cover letters based on the job descriptions that they see, and we don't know whether what we're seeing in both the resumes or in the job descriptions are really true. And so I'm going to set you up, Julia, to talk about the issue of validation and sort of a big question is trust, right? Can we trust the stuff that's going into this? So do you want to talk a little bit about your role and perspective on the trustworthiness of skill data and whether we can get it there?
Can I stand up?
Sure. Can I stop you? No.
I just can't sit down and talk at the same time. That's two skills.
We'll put that on your resume.
Okay, so that was really helpful, Ben. Thank you. So I'm obviously looking good because I'm an economist, so much more exciting than accountants. So, you know, when we're thinking about job market matching, which is what we're really talking about here around skills, and we heard from both Steve and the other Julia what the reason to develop skills data is, and I had written down in advance the same three things that they mentioned. A worker wants to know, I trust that if I acquire the right kind of skill, it's going to be worth something in the marketplace. And the employer, very important, is going to say, I trust that if I hire someone with the right kind of skills, that they're going to be able to do the job. And then the agency is going to say, I trust that if I invest in the right kind of skills, that my state or my constituency is going to get better jobs and higher economic growth. So just translating it into those goals. So what that means is we want timely, local, and actionable data about the price of different types of skills and the number of hires or the number of jobs associated with those skills. And you want those in a timely fashion. So, how are we going to do that? Well, 30 years ago, we heard from Julia that ONET came in and disrupted things because they thought through how to solve the problems that they were trying to do with the existing data that they had. I'm going to say we can be equally disruptive now with the people in this room if we simply try and think about the data that are available and apply modern tools and standards. So, how are we going to get data on price and quantity of different sets of skills? Well, Jeff, you talked about, this is the modern challenge. When I started LEHD 35 years ago, and Kim remembers this, I'm not going to go into details, but that was the problem I was trying to figure out. What you need to do to understand the return to investment in on-the-job training, which is what I was interested in as an assistant professor at American University, you need universe data on workers and universe data on firms, because most workers work for big firms, but most firms are small. So you cannot do a sample that is representative of both workers and firms. And if you want to understand what the impact is on skills of technological change, you need data on employers longitudinally, on their workers longitudinally, and you need to look at it over time, right? You need to see the shock to the employers, you need to see the response to the workers in terms of their skills, you need to see how the prices are changing, you need to see what happens to match quality. You need to see when an employer hires someone with a set of skills, advertised set of skills, and the worker has a particular set of skills that they say, were they lying? Well, the best way you're going to be able to see that is how long the match lasts and what happens to the quality of the match in terms of earnings. Now tell me, does a data set with jobs and earnings for all workers and all firms in the covered sector exist?
LinkedIn.
If you, let me regrade you. Your PhD's from NYU. I'm going to get in touch with them. I know people. It's New York. I know people. Wage records. And we could do better than that than 35 years ago when I built LEHD. Because we have payroll records. We have something called JetX that the Chamber has put together. We have a state, funded by Sean Murphy, that had, Walmart, he's not personally responsible writing checks. And we have a ton of states who have been working over the past 35 years to build up the capacity. We've got SLDSs, we've got NASWA's NLX, we have all the pieces, parts, we have what you guys have been doing. We have all the pieces, parts that could be implemented now that could provide information in a local, timely, actionable way. So the last piece is how do we build trust in those data? What you need is to be able to say that it's validated. You can be able to look at the quality of the matches and you need to be able to provide a loop back from what the employer says they wanted and what they got, and that's the kind of thing that CBEN, for example, has been putting together. You also need information about the types of AI shocks that are coming. That's what the industries of ideas and other types of projects have been doing. So, the data exists, the tools exist, the infrastructure needs to be put in place, and I'm looking at Julia and Steve on this, and others, everyone in the room. So, what you really need to do is not just wait back and expect individuals to leap up and put a very complex set of bits together. You need an independent entity that can be charged with pulling the pieces together and creating, if you like, an Airbnb for skills, or a Rotten Tomatoes for skills, so that you got that match and that constant feedback loop between employers, job seekers, and state agencies. How does that happen? Well, part of my checkered past, I sat at NIST for a year and studied standards, how they developed, and what makes them work. And very typically, the way in which standards and evaluation and validation and trust comes from an external evaluation by a competent external agency, or an entity, I'm sorry. And that's what that entity can do. So I'm going to stop with just a little story here. I'm half Swedish. A very famous Scandinavian, his name was Harald Blåtand. I'm descended from him, it turns out, in a linear line. You'll not be surprised I come from Viking stock. Why he was famous, he was a 10th century Danish king who brought together warring tribes to agree. So when Ericsson, which was a Swedish company, yes, wanted to make their approach accepted and used by people who were setting up wireless communications, IBM, Intel, Nokia, these people had different views of how to make things work. They set up a wireless standard called Bluetooth. Blåtand is Bluetooth in English. So the notion here that there are these many pockets, they set up what's called a Bluetooth special interest group. And it took time, we've talked a little bit about that, but they got some runs on the board right away. You build on those runs on the board. The states can do this, the laboratories of democracy, and you can experiment in a way that federal agencies can't. So my challenge is going to be to ETA, be as disruptive as ONET was 35 years ago. New technologies, existing data, existing work that can be done. I was talking to our friend Jason just now. They can start tomorrow. Arkansas can start, and the other states can start.
Thanks, Julie. So I want to actually switch over to Matt here for a moment in terms of talking a little bit about, so Julia talks about a longer-term vision. It's
An immediate vision.
With some immediate impact. But in the meantime, we also need to solve problems today in lots of places that don't have the immediate solution yet. So how do we get to the balancing the issue of we need better data, we need better skills data, we need better, more trustworthy skills data, and we need data to make decisions today. Do you want to just sort of speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So first of all, one thing that when we think about what characterizes our job market today, the good news is it's not warring tribes. The good news is that you know we seated next to a Viking. But we don't have warring tribes. What we do have is an inability to be able to make effective translation. Put differently, one of the things that impedes the kinds of labor market efficiency that Ben was describing before is is fundamentally a translation problem. And I think this is something that we do have an opportunity to begin to solve today. Even before we can get to a new, more elegant taxonomy if one is needed, I think there's sets of things that we can do already to, first of all, affect better translation across the market. We know that employers are speaking in a language of jobs and tasks and skills. We know that educators are speaking in a language of learning objectives. We know that credentials are often defined in ways that speak sometimes of neither. We know that workers are just trying to understand what job can I do next, and what would it take to get there. And these are things where we don't need to force everyone to speak Esperanto. We don't need to necessarily define Esperanto. We have the ability now to be able to say, okay, how do we help somebody hear what they need to hear? How does an employer understand where skills live both geographically and occupationally around the market? What's adjacent? How does an educator understand what are the capabilities that are needed in order for graduates to be able to place into an effective job? So I think, let's start first with recognizing that skills data can be that kind of connective tissue, and that we can create translation mechanisms that can affect that as one of the places that we start. I think the other thing which I would point to when I think about how we approach this problem today and how do we get started. I would say that a part of the way we need to get started is by defining a set of specific problems, specific decisions that need to be informed. Again, it's easy to think about this in technical terms. The extent to which we can frame specific problems that impede people's progression. How do we define the skills for a sector? How do we, that we've prioritized that in a given area as emerging? How do we define who's stalled in an economy and what would move them ahead? I think we can build the sets of pilots that start to enable skills to be a key unlock in affecting greater economic mobility and ensuring that employers have the talent that they need.
Yeah, so I heard from what you just said, Matt, that to some degree, while you disagree with Julia, you also agree with her, is what I heard. I love setting that up. Because what I heard was there's a need for solving the problem now, and that it's right now it's a translation problem, and to some degree the standards begins to get at some of that issue. But I think both of you would agree that the pilot testing and probably learning from those pilot tests are really going to be the direction that we have to go.
I would certainly agree both that developing those kinds of tactical pilots will give us evidence.
Right.
I would also agree with the importance of leveraging the data that we have. We can and should be aspiring to more effective data systems. We can and should be aspiring to more effective data structures. But we have more than we realize. And that's why I sort of think about things like translation and signaling, because we can harness data that we can have. We can create scaffolds around them. And the last thing that I'll agree on with Julia, maybe the very last of the conversation, I don't know, is the need
we don't like agreement here.
Is the need for validation.
No, the last will be when you disagree. That will be the end.
But here's what I'll say on validation. I think there's different ways to validate. And my focus on validation is highly empirical, which is to say, when we look at a skill, not just how do we know, from what data source, those are important questions, but when somebody acquires a skill, does it move them ahead, right? The job posting may say you need this skill. Which skills actually result in someone getting hired? Which skills result in somebody moving up? Which skills result in somebody getting paid better? And those are things which we can measure. And that's a critical part of the validation that I want to make sure doesn't get left out here.
So, Chris, you've been very quiet during the Warring Tribe routine here. And I know from your perspective, because you work in a foundation, that there's an interest there in terms of who accesses. And a lot of the sort of innovation that we've been seeing, we've really encouraged a lot of private sector innovation in particular, but it comes at a fee. And I think even Jennifer in the previous session talked about, look, if I'm not getting it from the public sector, I got to go find it elsewhere. Right. So I'd love to hear your sort of perspective on how do we get over these sort of restrictions that are being created by the private sector generating this and generating these data, and how do we get to a more open, transparent system?
Yeah, thank you. And I'm Celtic, so we can get into the middle of it. So thank you. I sat quietly for a reason.
My other half is Irish. It's not a good mix.
So I think about it. I'm not an economist. I'm an art teacher by initial training, and then I went on and got into finance. My brother started in West Point and wound up in art. So we kind of like one of those movies where we went to grad school together and our bodies switched. Is kind of my life story. But when I began in this work, and I worked in state government before coming to Illumina Foundation, I've been there about 5 years, is I close my eye and think about who am I building this for? And a lot of this conversation, we're building things for IBM, we're building things for very large employers who want to take the next most beautiful thing and make it even more beautiful. And we leave out all the small to mid-sized employers that are really the heart of the country and where the problem is, and the noise we hear. When I used to work in the Florida college system, I was the executive vice chancellor, and for 6 months I filled in as chancellor as they were hiring a new chancellor. We had community college baccalaureate degrees, and the legislature put a moratorium and said, we don't need those anymore because we had no proof of the workforce. So I walked down the street, talked to our State Department of Labor, Adrienne Johnson, who's now the Commerce Secretary, and I said, can we work together? She said, sure. So we just took the employment projections that the LMI shop already did. We cut them, organized them by community college service area, and every year there's employment projections for that college's service area. I walked back to the legislature and said, here's a practical solution. You have supply and demand as the first step in the approval process. We wrote into legislation, and now anytime anybody wants to start a bachelor's degree, they have to do that first as a first step because it's directional. Employers might come in, economic development might be happening, that's totally fine, but it works. You know what happened? My rural colleges started being able to offer bachelor's degrees. You know why? Because they couldn't afford all the other stuff that they needed to make the case and prove it. So there's a role for us in government when we close our eyes, when we think about the future of ONET, when we think about applying AI tools. We can't think about what does, Meta need. Yeah, they need to parse out which kind of engineers, whatever. Small to mid-sized employers need to know, I need somebody with a range of skills that can fit somewhere in between here. At the same time, you have colleges and universities who are like, I've been doing it one way for forever. We did some work recently with CBIN where we back of the envelope calculation. A bachelor's degree has almost 3,000 skills embedded in it. 144 unique new skills in college algebra alone. 218 in total because you do curriculum scaffolding where you relearn things from beforehand to make sure you continue learning forward, right? So when we go down this skills path, we're going to have thousands of skills. The question is, how do you bundle them? How do you put them together? How do you make them make sense? And so that's where I think about there's an opportunity for the private sector, if they've been doing it, I'll just pick on 10 years, they've been waiting for a paper. You know what I mean? Like public-private partnership is also a private-public partnership where the dollars we invest as public entities and for the public good to private entities also needs to flow back in both directions. And I think it's a solvable problem if we decide to work together. Yeah. In the 1960s, we had a question about what is non-credit education. It took 6 years. It had the Department of Labor, Department of Ed, it had the Department of Defense, and others, and private industry, auto workers at the table, and they came up with a measurement for non-credit. You know what it's called? The Continuing Education Unit. Mm-hmm. 6 years of federal work and work groups coming together to name it what it is. And we just then use it, right? Because there's the reasons we don't use it, and we can get into that. But there's an opportunity for public-private partnerships and for the public use of data. But the first thing you have to do is close your eyes and say, who am I building this for? And if you're building it for a Fortune 500 company, I would suggest you're building it for the wrong audience.
Well, so I would argue, and Ben, I want to turn to you on this. I would argue one of the challenges, you raised the issue of ONET not being used by the private sector, for example. And I would argue one of the biggest challenges is it's a very hidden secret that a lot of people, most people, everybody doesn't know about, beyond the people in this room probably. And that part of the reason why it's never been used is we've never sort of figured out a way to integrate it into other systems. And that's really, I think, where the private sector sort of stepped in and tried to do some of that work. But now, of course, part of the challenge also is it costs a lot because of it's done through a survey that's got all kinds of, and we've heard about some of the challenges on how the data is being collected. So I want to sort of switch a little bit on the issue of how can we make, and even if we go from an ONET skills version, 2027 version, we're still going to run into the same issue. So how do we use technology to help improve the tool that we have currently and maybe help us get it out there so that it is more widely used? Because I think by doing that, we'll begin to influence things like hiring decisions and hiring decision processes.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much to say there. So I think one thing I wanna push back against that I think Matt said, just to keep things spicy, is this idea of skills being this Rosetta Stone, this translation device. I think we can talk about skills, competencies, capabilities, whatever it is. Those are really attributes of people, whatever we call them. We're talking about attributes of individual people. Those are not components of jobs. If you want to break down a job, you can't break it down into skills. You have to break it down into work activities, into tasks. A job is a bundle of tasks, and a person, all of us, are bundles of attributes, skills being one of those attributes. Now, I think that is an important lens to have, and especially as we're talking about how AI is affecting the labor market. It doesn't automate skills, it automates tasks. So we have to think about how jobs transform and adapt to all of that to keep it timely. So I think I think the best thing that ONET did is define a really nice structure for how activities, skills, occupations all fit into each other. Wish they would have done seniority levels, but that's another story. Okay, so I think that is one thing that I think we need to create. And I think there is a lot of very valuable data out there, like what Matt said. I mean, the data's there. Not every job posting is perfect. Not every resume is perfect. There's a lot of crap in there. But these are economic artifacts. They are there for a reason, for people to do search and match effectively. There is a very big incentive to have that be accurate. So I think the data is I think we gotta give credit to there being lots and lots of data and ways to process that. Now, in terms of technical frontiers, so this idea of locality. So I want to just talk about taxonomies as a tree-based structure. Let's say at the top of the tree, things are really broad, and then they get more granular, more granular, more granular. And the firms, want a lot of granularity. They want to blast things into, lots of very idiosyncratic skills. So it gets deeper, 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 deeper. At the very end of the day, you need a lot more than 1,000 occupations and a few thousand skills. You need probably at least 40,000 occupations, at least 75,000 skill groups, I mean. And of course, the underlying individual skills are going to be in the tens of millions. So there's a lot of data, but what are you supposed to do with that? If you have hierarchical flexibility, that's great. You make a cut here, call it a broad group, make a cut below it, call it a detailed group, whatever it is. But what you can do with a deep enough taxonomy is that you can make, this is getting a little technical, a little wonky, but bear with me, is that you can make kind of custom cuts on this tree. So for a specific firm, for a specific industry, for a specific geography, you don't want a flat cut on the tree. You want to go really deep into this space and stay broad into that space. For someone else, you want to stay broad into this space, you want to go deep into the other space. So what you get, if you have the same tree, but custom cuts on the tree, is you get interoperability and custom-made taxonomies. So there really doesn't have to be a tension between universality, interoperability, on the one hand, and locality and specific needs on the other hand. So I think we can have, one system to rule them all. I don't think we need, taxonomies for workforce development, different set of taxonomies for this industry, for that industry, for this county. We can have one tree. We can have one singular common language, common understanding of what is the taxonomy of skills in the economy? What is the taxonomy of work activities? What is the taxonomy of occupations? And how those all fit together, have all those crosswalks. These are all technically possible. And while we're on the topic of activities, we had tried to build a taxonomy of activities 5 years ago. Couldn't do it. And the issue was that, you have a cluster of similar sentences. Great, you can get activities from responsibility sections on job postings, bullet points on resumes. There's a lot of data out there. Statements of work from consulting projects. It's tons and tons and tons of data out there. But you have to label them. It has to be usable to a person. And, November 2022, ChatGPT comes out. Labeling became so easy. You say, here's a cluster of sentences, summarize it. It's exactly what large language models are good at. We are at a point where everything we need to build this system that's universal, local, adapts as the economy adapts, everything's out there. We have it at our disposal.
Chris, I see body language telling me you desperately want to get in.
I just want to bring it back. You're right, and the leaves on that tree and the bark and stuff is just the data, right? Because a taxonomy is nothing but just grouping things together, right? And we can't group things together if we don't have a really strong tree that you want to prune and not just tear out the ground, right? And so I was in the conversations last week at the Department of Ed talking about data quality. This whole conversation, data quality is hygiene for AI. We can't run these models and do this stuff if the quality's not right. And I think, progress that can be made is ensuring the data quality that comes in is good, right? And I'll just share what I wonder is, as a recommendation, because that's what we're here to do, is kind of push a practical, right? You said pragmatic and practical at the beginning, Ken, is just moving a lot of the data into a statistical agency. A lot of this is program data or other data that we're dealing with. When you look at data in statistical agencies, which have data dictionaries, which have technical review panels to make sure you're measuring exactly what you say you're going to measure, you have experts come around and talk about each data element. You spend a long time talking about it. I know economists don't like it, but I do because I'm a statistician, so that's why I'm talking. And so focusing on people whose specialty, talking about occupations, is the measurement of items is critically important. I've done some work over the past 18 months in a room full of wonderful economists, Council of Economic Advisors, economists in the room with state leaders and others, and the value of having really good definitions and terms and having a process to revise and look at those terms over time to make sure they're actually measuring what you think they're measuring through cognitive interviews, things along those lines. I think will go a long way to improving the data quality of what we have currently, which will make AI and all the tools and things we want to do so much better.
Well, let me just jump in and say,
Can
go for it.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to disagree, not surprisingly, having spent a lot of time with the federal statistical system. So you are correct that the federal statistical system does a very nice job with survey data, and they have a very thoughtful paradigm. And if you look at the Federal Committee on Statistical Methodology, data quality measures, but data quality is not defined by producers. Data quality is context specific, and the trust in data is context specific. Let me give you an example. So, for example, the American Community Survey is beautifully developed and well documented and beautifully put out. So, by an external measure that only focused on production, it would look like that was top data quality, but it is not fit for purpose for anything that is at local levels or small geographies and small demographies. So what you have to have at the table is the users. The federal statistical system does not have direct connections to the users that you were actually just hearing from Ben and Matt. They don't understand their use case where what you need for a workforce information system, we have just heard it, is local, timely, actionable. They will spend 4 years kicking the can down the road with National Academy studies, and there isn't the back and forth with the user community.
I agree. It depends how you set up the committee. And for the case I know best of iPads at the National Center for Ed Statistics, they call in 40 people who are data users and providers across the country. We said 2 days in a room. We debated the data element. They write the summary. You put it out, and you change it.
And they cannot innovate. They're sausage makers. They're wonderful at producing sausages, but they can't innovate in response to demand. It's so I'm going to violate. So thinking about things that are fit for purpose.
We can agree to disagree, because if you look at things, they've changed over time actually in response to data users and producers. The challenge is in that room. To be transparent, it's only higher ed. That room needs to include employers.
Right.
We need to have cross-agency work groups. That needs to have workforce boards. There's a project I'm working on, will be coming out soon. I've been pressure testing. It's working well. Is how do we get the same data elements across WIOA, across Perkins, across apprenticeships, and across iPads. That's what the iPads is supposed to be. It's supposed to integrate them all together. The process works. The quality gets there. Where there's a challenge is the room is too homogeneic, to your point, and could be better. But even if we try and bring in outside voices, I've been in these rooms. It's who's in the room has what project they want to push for their own purposes. And so we can say we bring in employers, bring in 7 employers to represent the entire country. So no matter what, the process is going to be problematic, and there's no silver bullet. But there is an opportunity to ensure the data we have is the highest and most efficient quality possible to inform the typology creating that your Revio Labs is doing, that Burning Glass is doing, and others are doing to make sure they work really well for our communities and our country.
Matt, I'll give you one stab at this, and I want to switch gears a little bit.
So first of all, I would almost violently agree here. I'm actually kind of a Pacific guy, usually.
You're not just another pretty face. You learn over time. Watch that. We need to design around use cases, right? So one of the problems that I think we've tended to see in most data series, ONA included, is that we're trying to solve for too many things at once, and we're trying to design in the abstract. Right.
So we need to say, okay, what are the 3 or 4 decisions that we think are most important that ONA can serve, and then work backwards, and understand not just how do we think about it as a taxonomy, as Ben articulated, kind of different ways that we can keep a taxonomy fresh, but how do we intersect it with other dimensions of insight and intelligence that are going to make sure that it's, again, fit for purpose. But I think where ETA can play a very important role here is not only in the broad design of the instrument, not only ensuring that it is fit for purpose, but in creating different levels of evidentiary standard for what kind of validation is required. Right? There is a difference between exploratory signals, right? What are the signals that are good enough for example, a job seeker to be able to get a sense for where opportunity is. We want to make sure that that's obviously as accurate as possible, but we want to make sure that it's actually as easy to understand as possible, yes. that it's highly timely, that it's highly specific. That's a different evidentiary standing from what I would call planning grade evidence. Mm-hmm. Where we say, okay, we're going to make investments in programs. This needs to be more future-looking. It needs to have trend data that's embedded into it. And that's still different from what I would call sort of an accountability grade evidence, where we have to say, okay, we're going to make actually decisions to close programs, to reward programs that provide good outcomes. And there we actually have to have validation and outcomes. And I think if we can create that framework that says, what do we need to know for what kinds of decisions? It will make the question of data quality not an abstract question.
Correct.
Or a general good, but something that is oriented toward what we're trying to achieve.
I want to violently agree.
Who knew?
It's so meaningful. I started a company called the College Initiative, and you may wonder why I called it the College Initiative. It was after Samuel Taylor Coleridge, and he wrote a very famous poem called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. And my line there for Coleridge was, data, data everywhere, we have to stop and think. And I think you just made that point, so.
And all the boards did shrink.
Yep.
Yes.
Let me also jump in here and really talk a bit about the notion that what we've been hearing is, first of all, there's a number of different challenges we're grappling with that are related to technical problems, governance problems, the fragmentation of the system, for example. There's issues around how to use technologies. There's obviously trust and quality questions. One of the things that keeps coming up in the conversations I have is an interest in looking forward and not backwards. How do you become more predictive in the data? Because when you start talking about the data everywhere, can it tell me where I need to go, right? And so I'm curious from your perspective, how can we create a system that reflects that understanding that what most of the people who are using this data want to really know is where do they go next? And can this data help them make those decisions? So does anybody want to sort of jump in on that in terms of that particular point?
Yeah, and I think this actually ties in nicely to this idea of being. So I'll disagree with you guys, just because I don't learn my lesson. Okay, so I think we can have something that works for everybody. I don't think we need to pick and choose. I think we can have it all, and maybe that's hopelessly naive, but maybe that's what it takes. But also about validation, so we at Revelia Labs, we sell data to a bunch of different stakeholders, companies, academic researchers, and most notably hedge funds. And hedge funds are very interested in understanding, companies, markets, and that needs to be forward-looking. Now, they impose standards with a good deal of profanity. They will make sure that this gets validated, and it's accurate because there's a lot of money on the line. That gives some market incentive to ensure that these structures work in a very nice, polished way, that they're usable for forward-looking analysis. Now, I think none of us really want to be in the business of forecasting, what's the skill growth going to be in 5 years. I mean, when that exists in BLS, it's not very accurate, as you all know. That's, end users can do that. They can analyze this data as long as it's structured the right way. But this validation doesn't just happen with these stakeholders in mind. It happens with a variety of different stakeholders that are from the private sector, that are from financial services. So I think if we do want to build something that is usable for everyone, and I think we can, we should make sure that it's not just the validation that we have, that there's review that happens through some centralized entity, that maybe we'll spin up here, but that market review also gets incorporated into improving taxonomies, ontologies, whatever we're creating. So I think if we think about how to make something forward-looking, work with stakeholders that are interested in having something that is forward-looking. Investment management firms, companies that are doing compensation benchmarking, talent acquisition. I mean, these are, strategic workforce planning. These are all entities that are concerned with data that can help them be forward-looking and will provide feedback, whether we want it or not. They will help with validation in addition to a structure that we might cook up that will also help in that validation and maybe complement that.
All right, Julia, I'll give you one last word on this, and then I want to begin to do a wrap up on our real question that we want to answer.
Sounds great. So one thing I want to feed back to you, Chris, is really probably the market for this information is small and medium-sized enterprises. A lot of the big companies can pay for themselves, right? As we just said, yeah.
Money, right?
No, I'm trying to find someone who is in the market. But so how can we get headlights for the LMI shops and because that's who you went to in Florida, right? So it's not like there's just one big shock that hits the economy like a tidal wave all at the same time. So what you want to see is what kind of shocks are hitting employers. So if you think about the theory of change here, technological change, most companies are just kind of boogieing along, right? But you get the technological change, which is freaking everyone out right now, which is AI. It's different in different states, in different times, and in different ways. So, for example, in Arkansas, in Kentucky, in every state, the type of AI that is used is going to be different in those different states. And a lot of it is the shocks and the changes are going to come out of, for example, investments that are made by the federal science system in those states. And then you'll see the adaptation. So you can trace the impact on the workforce. So you can see the shock by the employer who's adopting it from a variety of different sources. You can see the shock on the workforce. And as the states compare notes through the multi-state data collaborative and other communication mechanisms, that's how you get the forward-looking shock from the experiences of other people. And that you can model not by a regression on a flat file, Jeff, of the worker, but the shock to the employer for whom they work and what happens to that worker-employer match. So it's that kind of interaction that you can draw from.
I come also from the employee side.
Both sides.
Both sides.
Both sides.
Because we surveyed and said, what data matters most to you? Because I get pitched a lot on building navigation tools. You can imagine the number of navigation tools that people call me and want money to build. And I said, let me go out and ask adults, right? So we had focus groups across the country and said, what data matters to you? You know what matters? The company, who they're going to be working for.
Right.
Because if a company's in a community and the company doesn't have a good reputation,
exactly,
or how they treat or how they work, we have a labor force participation rate.
Right.
It's a whole bigger conversation. So it's not just I agree with you, but this is why we need to have rooms that are cross agency and more inclusive of diverse viewpoints, because
which is being built.
Which is being built, but we need to do that faster, right? So having like
Precisely.
education people talk to education people to build education data, and economists talk to economists to build economist data. Is like
just don't make us talk to accountants.
Yeah, well, accountants talk to accountants. Yeah,
yeah
our teachers we don't even use data. We just paint. But having non-homogenic or heterogeneic rooms, to use a fancy term, right, Jeff? Thank you very much. To use rooms that are more complex in the perspectives, and the people that use their voice is really important to have a richer, more complete data system that will better serve employers, people looking for work, labor force participation rates, and ultimately communities. That's just really at the heart of who we are.
I think part of, by the way, being more forward-looking, and I think Chrissy just said something really important, which is that there's a difference between the market's future and a career's future. And they have different sets of data will inform them, right? So if we're trying to understand where the market is going, yes, there's a set of things we can do. We can define a set of bellwethers. We can be able to look at forward trends and model those forward. And we can also do something very important, which is we can talk to employers and validate through them what it is that they need. Things like the Skills First initiative that we've been leading in partnership with Walmart and a dozen other companies is very much about making sure that we have employers informing what defines the future of a role. But the future of a career is different. Because there, part of what I'm trying to do is not just look at the leading edge of where is the market going, but I'm trying to understand what proves out in a career. to Chris's point, if I work at company X versus company Y, one of the things that we found in our analysis is that those are probably some of the biggest determinants of your upward mobility, of your chances of moving ahead. Being able to understand that if I earn a given credential, will it move me ahead or will it not? 2/3 of them don't. And so those are the kinds of things that start to give somebody a sense of where their future is and what's forward for them.
So I want to, we're coming up towards the end of our session, and so I want to get to the very final point that we wanted to get to, which is what do we want ETA to do about all this? And it occurs to me, I got 6 items here that I'm gonna roll through, and then I'm gonna have you guys respond to whether you think those are the right ones, because I think they reflected in the conversation we had. One is I heard modernizing ONET and using AI as a tool to help with validation. A second is really trying to get data, really using standards to build data interoperability, and doing it using use cases. The third is I think I heard Julia talk a little bit about the need for capacity. State agencies in particular having the capacity to be successful because they're building their own tools as well. So it's not just about ONET, but it's about all the tools that we're trying to create, particularly on the public side. I heard a lot about experimentation at the state level, so seeding some of those experimentation in whatever way we can. Leveraging public-private partnerships as a mechanism for trust and transparency, I think are both of those are really important elements. And then ensuring that we're evaluating through external sources the measures that we're using to ensure we got the quality that we need. Those are kind of the 6 that I heard during the course of this conversation. What did I miss? Julia, you always have something.
I would say an independent external entity that enables that to happen. So,
enables what to happen?
Enables these activities to occur.
Okay, got it.
That knits together many of these pieces, but that is charged with moving things forward. Because otherwise it's just going to be a series of individual pilots, and there's not going to be a core vision. And that can be done with public-private partnerships, obviously, and that can also organize the evaluation and validation.
Okay. Yeah. Chris, you're looking like you desperately want to add something.
I do, because the thing that I didn't hear you say, and you did a nice job summarizing, Ken, you're doing a great job leading us, so thank you for helping us, Ken.
I don't know that anybody's leading this.
Yeah.
If anyone noticed.
I'll just continue to say, it's got to be, we've got to break down silos, and the way you break down silos is bringing people in with different voices, like this panel has. I like to be contrarian every once in a while, because it kind of spices up the panels in my experience. But it's cross-agency.
This has been very boring.
Yeah.
How many of you have found this panel boring? I'll see you afterwards.
But how do we have more inclusive looks at data to include people who aren't typically in the room, right? And that can be education people need labor and economic development and scientists in the room. Labor economists need people that aren't labor economists in the room to talk about it and raise these questions. So I don't know what that fits, but cross-agency, cross-expertise, cross-something is what's missing.
Singing my language, definitely.
Yeah, and it's not, I mean, existing like the National Secure Data Service and the Evidence Act, and all these things are trying to do it at a policy higher level. I would just say, but I didn't hear something more at a more granular level is the only thing I would add to what you listed.
Right, okay.
Yeah, what I would add is that there's, I mean, just to echo what Julia 1, or Julia 2, I don't know. But,
are you calling
Julia
number 1 and me number 2?
Oh, God, this is a lose-lose. But
he has a death wish, I know.
What was said earlier in the day is that, you know, if we do want a Manhattan project for modernizing our infrastructure, then private companies need to be a part of it. I think there are ways that private solutions have eclipsed, you know, public solutions, and we need to take advantage of that. And it's complicated, and you know, you guys are all the experts on how to do this, how to structure it. But it needs to happen. I think when I talk to other like HR tech companies, other economists, everyone wants to help. You know, there's a problem. I think it is. I don't think, you know, we should think of private sector companies as just like looking to make a quick buck. I think there is a lot that people want to do to just modernize, get the field forward, and I think we can't afford to be slow on this, or to kind of stand on ceremony on you know whatever logistical constraints we want to impose on ourselves. This needs to happen, and there's a lot of work already being done, and we need to find a way to take advantage of that.
Yep. Do it now.
Yeah, do it now.
You know, I would just add a couple things that may be hiding inside some of your 6 categories, but I think are worth calling out specifically. First is, and this may be part of modernizing ONET, but I think it's broader than that. It's about developing the level of granularity that enables actionability. Right now, we have a mechanism that is national. We have a mechanism that is meant to work across sectors, and that's meant to work across geographies. It doesn't give the specificity that people in the field need in order to be able to support people who are facing displacement, whose careers have stalled, to support employers finding talent. You mentioned interoperability, but I think part of interoperability is actually creating effective empirical crosswalks. Take the example of how we map between programs of study and occupations and the underlying skills that affect that bridge. Right now, we've done that in a very theoretical sort of way with the SIPSOC crosswalk. There's an opportunity to rebuild that based on how do real people actually transition. And the last thing I'll mention here, again, which may be lurking in your categories, Ken, but is transparency. I agree wholeheartedly with Ben that there's a lot of great innovation happening in the private sector. I spent 20 years of my career before doing the work I'm doing now in the nonprofit sector. I spent 20 years in the for-profit sector building large data sets. You know, what we need to make sure of is that we can, on one hand, enable that kind of innovation, take advantage of that innovation, but also create the transparency that allows us to understand where's the data coming from, what validation has it undergone or not, what representation does it have. It doesn't mean that those data sets are not to be trusted. It means that we need to make sure that we have the transparency that enables them to be trusted so that we can actually take full use of them.
Right. I'm seeing Julia, who always has something else to add.
This was a great conversation. We're actively working on developing rubrics of data quality that are fit for purpose. And so we're using LLMs, this is with Google Research, to read documents that describe the trust that both users and producers have in it, identifying the 5 FCSM elements. So if any of you are interested in helping build out that corpus of documents, please email me. We'll engage you. My email is julia.lane@nyu.edu, and we'll be sharing it with lots of people as well.
So the bottom line here, though, is I didn't hear people say throw away ONET.
No.
What I'm hearing is we've got an asset, we need to build on it, we need to make it better, we need to localize it, we need to use technologies, we need to make sure we engage people to help us, a whole bunch of different people, heterogeneous people, coming from all kinds of, all stripes, to help with driving what that looks like. We need some external independent validation, maybe it's a convening of some sort that brings together people from across different networks. And that feels to me like where I'm hearing you all speak. And Ben really wants to get into that private sector piece.
I would caveat that.
Yeah.
Is this on, or no? It's not on. But I'll
yeah,
oh, wow,
you're back.
okay. Yeah, I'm gonna, okay, so I would say that, we certainly need a standard. I think we need ONET. We need what ONET can be. to be a common language where firms, workforce development agencies, education providers, everyone speaks a common language. We need a single common language, for sure. What I would say is that I think we need a changing role for ONET. I think the idea of adding new occupations and skills based on human review is outdated, and I don't think that should be done by ONET or humans at all. I think that should be done through some validation. I'd love to see ONET do more versioning, more CI/CD, it's continuous improvement, continuous deployment, so more integration, more embedding into systems. But I think developing the taxonomy itself, I think can be done in more modern ways.
All right, terrific.
Yeah.
I want to first of all say thanks to each and every one of you. I knew this was going to be an uncontrollable panel, so you were true to your nature, and I appreciate it.
Well, you shouldn't have given us vodka before.
I know. That was water,
That was
Julia.
from Scott. That was from Scott Cheney, calling out Credential Engine.
All right, so let's say thanks to our panelists for their engagement.
Thanks.
And Steve, am I turning it over to you? Okay. You're going to take us to lunch.
Well, thank you very much to both of our panels, and to this last panel. I can't think of a better session to send us into lunch. We're about 15 minutes ahead of schedule, so we're going to go upstairs to the 6th floor cafeteria, Tostada Tuesday, and we're going to stay at lunch until 1:30. So we have about an hour and 15 minutes instead of an hour and a half. From the 6th floor cafeteria, we're going to go straight to breakout rooms in the afternoon. So on the 3rd floor, we will have a session on the employer perspective, diving a little deeper from that angle. And then on the 5th floor, we have a session focused more on the workforce system and job seeker perspective. So you have to choose between the two. You can't be in two places at once. And hopefully we get sort of a rough, mix of folks going to each breakout. Those room numbers are on your agenda. We'll have folks in hallways kind of directing you where to go. And then we take a break in the middle of the afternoon at around 2:45. And then there's a second concurrent set of breakout sessions. Again, look at the agenda, but the 3rd floor will be technical solutions. This is a session that's going to look a little bit more specifically at learning and employment records and some technologies around those solutions. And then another session on the 5th floor will be from the education and training provider perspective. We will come back down here at 4:30. Those second breakout sessions will end. And then by about 4:45, we're going to reassemble back in the Great Hall to send everybody off. And then we'll be back here in the Great Hall at 9 o'clock again tomorrow morning. So that's what the rest of the day looks like. And then the second day tomorrow. I know we won't have everybody here with us tomorrow because some of the folks at the LER event are going to go have the rest of their event. But again, we really appreciate you all joining us here today, and hopefully this was useful for you all. So, all right. I'll send you to lunch. Thanks, everybody.